après-midi. Bon après-midi et bienvenue à notre séminaire et lancement. That's it in French. Back to English. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. So welcome to our seminar on advancing gender equal media. And the seminar is basically to do two things: to hear from a number of colleagues around issues around advancing gender media equality, and to launch our AGEMI web platform. So we're very pleased that you're here. We're hoping that you're going to learn some new things about what we're doing. If we just say something very briefly about what AGEMI is. So AGEMI is Advancing Gender Equality in Media Industries. And it's a consortium, as you can see here, of 5 partners, 3 universities, my own university, Newcastle, in the UK, University of Padova, the University of Gothenburg, Copaeum, and the EFJ. So the 5 of us are working together, we have been working together for the last 2 years on this project, to produce something which we think is actually really meaningful and helpful to us, I mean both the people who are in this room who are obviously interested in these issues, but more generally anyone who's interested in issues around equality, gender equality in the media. So these are who we are, and 4 of those 5 people mentioned there are actually attending this event. One of our colleagues, Maria Edström from Gothenburg, can't be with us today. But you can see the 4 of us, we try and have fun when we get together. And we try to have this, we try to be seated in a chair at every possible opportunity. That's not always possible, but we do try. The primary aim of AGEMI is, we've said it's building bridges. So it's trying to build different bridges between different things. So bridges across the globe, bridges in terms of languages, bridges in terms of how we learn from each other. We're focusing very much on students, young people, media professionals, but also organisations, NGOs who are working in this kind of broad area. So what we're imagining with this project is it actually does, you know, we're trying to make it as multilingual as possible because, as you will no doubt know, so much of web-based materials around gender equality is in English, and we're trying to make it more accessible in different languages. So that's our kind of primary aim, is to build those bridges and to share knowledge, share awareness, particularly in terms of where organisations are actually working to advance gender equality in their own organisations, because what tends to happen is these things happen in an organisation, they don't really get cascaded anywhere else. So we're really keen, as you will see, that we're trying to raise awareness of all the good practices which are out there, as well as trying to raise awareness of some of the issues which are ongoing. So this is, I don't expect you to read this, but hopefully you will go up on the platform at some point and actually have a look at what we're doing. I just need to go back to remind us. Okay, so anyone who's in the room who really likes being on Twitter, please tweet and say what a fantastic time that you're having here. We've also just created a hashtag, so if anyone wants to use that hashtag, so the Twitter handle is AGEMI -EU, the hashtag is AGEMI launch. Not massively original, but you know, it seems to work for us. Now I just need to say that we're having a few little technical issues. I'm going to now try and close this particular PowerPoint presentation and introduce the speakers from the first session. So I'm going to attempt to do that. Escape. Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, okay. Okay. So, in this first session, you'll see from your programme that we've got, in principle, we have 4 speakers, but actually our first speaker, Michaela Sodrova, the MEP, said that she will be coming hopefully a bit later on. So we're going to skip Michaela for the time being, and we're going to be hearing from the next three panellists. Victoria Leroy, who is in the middle here, Policy Officer for the European Commission Communications Network Content and Technology, which is probably one of the longest DG names that we can think of. Cécile Greboval, who's the Programme Manager for the Council of Europe, Gender Equality Division, Gender Mainstreaming. And to my immediate right, Asha Allen, who's the Policy and Campaigns Officer for the European Women's Lobby. So we're going to go in the order of the programme. So it'll be Victoria, Cécile, and then Asha. And we'll just take some questions at the end, if that's okay with everyone. So thanks very much. Over to you.
So thank you very much, Karen, for the introduction. So thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm really glad to be among you. And as Karen said, I work in the European Commission in DG Connect, to abbreviate and make it less long, a name of a DG. And I work in the unit on audiovisual and media services policy, so our focus is mainly on audiovisual. But overall, I think the Commission has recognized the importance of gender diversity, in particular for a rich and creative audiovisual industry, and as well to have a more open, inclusive and competitive society. And I think this has been one of the priorities of our Commissioner for the Digital Economy and Society, Maria Gabriel, since the beginning of her mandate. And she has launched last year a strategy for women in digital in general. So this goes a bit beyond media and also much beyond audiovisual. But there were three pillars in this strategy. One was on fighting stereotypes, which is really relevant here. Another one was to promote STEM for women, so science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and also encourage digital entrepreneurship for women. So with this in mind, we have launched a declaration to encourage companies to have a more hands-on approach to close this digital gender divide, both for skills and also access and career opportunities in technologies. But this was also signed by some broadcasters, because of course we know that women are also underrepresented in technical positions in the media. So I think notably RAI and Nordic Entertainment Group signed this declaration last year. But I want to focus more specifically on fighting gender stereotypes because, as I said, I work in the unit dealing with the audiovisual sector, and we deal more specifically with the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which has been existing for some years already, and we have a few relevant provisions, although as I was discussing with Cécile, that are not always easy to apply, but voilà, they exist, and I think we hope in the future maybe we can build on those, but the Audiovisual Media Services Directive already provides that there should be no audiovisual commercial communications that includes or promotes any discrimination based on sex. So this is a very broad provision, and voilà, we know that there are examples of commercial communications that are not always favorable to women, to say the least, but it's in general what we see is more a landscape where certain professions or certain products are typically, or behaviors are typically associated more with men and women, and this is something that is quite difficult to address, and so far we didn't have any case law on this, unfortunately. But we also have a 2006 recommendation encouraging, from the Commission, encouraging the member states and the audiovisual media services to combat such gender-based discrimination and to promote a more diversified and realistic pictures of the skills and potentials of men and women in society. So this is a bit to give you the legal framework, what we have in place. And I think our commissioner has tried to reactivate a bit this topic and bring those issues to light, also using the recent momentum that we've had on women's rights. And last year, she has, on the occasion of the International Women's Day, asked the audiovisual regulators, so the stakeholders we work with on a daily basis, to look at what is in place at national level with regard to women's portrayal and representation in audiovisual media. So for that, in DG Connect, we've been working with two networks of regulators. One is our expert group of the Commission of Audiovisual Regulators, and we've also ERGA, and we've also been working with EPRA, another independent platform of regulators that goes a bit beyond the European Union. And in September last year, EPRA produced an interesting report based on the replies of their members, so of the audiovisual regulators, looking at women's portrayal and representation in broadcasting. And it looked at this topic from a variety of angles. It looked at the perception of regulators on this issue, whether research had been conducted on this topic, whether regulators have specific obligations and powers in place to address this, and whether there were other initiatives. So overall, the report found, I think you will not be surprised by this, but that women appear less on screen across a range of genres, and typically they are subject to more stereotypical portrayal and also degrading portrayal than men are. And off-screen, because it also looked at the situation off-screen, women are generally underrepresented, and even more so in senior or technical positions. So this report, I think I will give you a few figures, because they extracted figures from research that had been conducted at national level by regulators, and some figures are quite telling, although we also saw that there was a lack of general data, comprehensive data that would give the full picture of women portrayal and representation in Europe in audiovisual media. But in France, in 2017, women represented 42% on screen, but they dropped at 29% during peak time. So at the moment where you have the highest visibility, women were actually not visible, well, much less visible than men. On the Italian public service broadcaster, the conclusion from RAI was that women were rarely central in programs, so they most likely had secondary roles. In the UK, it was also interesting because they compared with age, and women aged 55 were seen less frequently on TV, while in Hungary, the number of women presenters decreased by more than 60% after the age of 40. So there was a clear correlation for women with age. And in Belgium, they looked at advertising, and they found out that in 42% of the cases, female characters were associated with a stereotype. So that's also quite a telling example. And how do regulators address that? I think there are really a variety of issues in this field of approaches at national level in this field. So some run, monitoring studies that enable us to have access to this kind of data. Other have very wide-ranging powers and obligations, and some others do it on a completely voluntary basis. And I think one quite surprising report is that if you have a committed audiovisual regulator, that can go a long way, because some of them don't have a legal remit but are very committed, and it was the case of Ireland and Macedonia, who are doing a lot of things on this issue, having action plans, having very comprehensive monitoring reports, and so on, whereas they did not have any statutory remit. Then there were also some good practices, like the French and Belgian cases, where the regulator really had strong powers, also sanction powers in case of breaches or infringements. And then there were other interesting initiatives, like regulators who were supporting women expert databases, or also campaign on TV to raise awareness on gender equality, or they were simply using, policies, guidelines, and having meetings and trainings with broadcasters, so more general things. I think for off-screen, it appeared that at least for audiovisual regulators, this topic was much less researched, and they, globally speaking, have much less power in this area, and they rely more on the general employment legislation, except the UK, where Ofcom has a specific remit for employment in the audiovisual sector. And overall, I think the main EPRA drew some interesting conclusions. They were reflecting on the possibility maybe to increase the competencies of regulators, because they saw that regulators were active and there was maybe scope to do more. But of course, this is a national prerogative. What is the remit of regulators? But definitely another thing to be addressed is the lack of comprehensive data, and maybe the potential to have something more coordinated at European level. And in general, a potential for greater coordination, sharing experience between regulators in this area. And also they saw a potential for a link, for a stronger link between media literacy and gender representation. So media literacy is a very broad topic, and we don't discuss very often gender representation, but they saw that this was an area where we could dig in and maybe do further work. So I think this report overall showed that the situation is unfortunately not perfect, that regulators are active in this field, but they should be encouraged to do more. So when the report was presented to Commissioner Gabriel in September, well, the Commission called on the regulators to remain active, to step up their efforts, and to remain a driving force in the audiovisual sector. And to follow a few of the recommendations of the EPRA report, in particular how to share best practices, and we have organized in November to follow up on that a session between our European regulators on women in advertising, where they could share further experience on data collection, on their legislative frameworks, on their initiatives, and we had a couple of very interesting examples, especially from the UK, where they are revising with the Advertising Standards Authority, they are revising the code on advertising standards, and also in France, where they were working with advertisers on how to address the situation. And I think the French example was, I don't know how it will develop, but they had this idea that how to address this global landscape, you know, that not only one advertising is harmful, but that all the ads taken together can have this harmful effect. So it was, so they were really working with advertisers on how to address that, and it was quite interesting. So this is a work in progress. And ERGA, our expert group of regulators, will further work on this topic because this is in their work program for this year. So they are going to look at some good practices from audiovisual media service providers, and also across the value chain in the audiovisual industry. And they will look at indicators that are currently in use by regulators when they monitor the situation of women on screen, to gather inspiration and what could be common indicators at European level. Of course, regulators have very different resources, so it's not tomorrow that they are going to have very comprehensive studies, but it would be good if they could agree on some minimum indicators that they would look at when they research this area. And I also wanted to say a few words about the Creative Europe program, especially the media strand, because although this is not an area I deal with myself, I think it's important because our colleagues have been collecting also gender data from the Creative Europe program. And there are some quite telling examples, some good and some bad. So on the good side, as far as trainings are concerned, they saw that in the last year, more than 50% of the training participants of the media program were women. And when they looked at the program strands that support emerging talents, they also saw that there the gap between men and women is quite narrow, or at least narrower than in other activity categories. But when they looked at the pictures globally, so those are the good, the good figures, but when they looked at the figures globally between 2014 and 18, they saw that overall the participants in all the media actions were 30% women versus 70% men. And also when looking at the distribution of a number of selected non-national films in 2018, out of 19 selected films, only 2 were made by women. So it shows that there is a kind of discrepancy between the efforts that the media program puts into training women in the production phase and then how films are distributed and reach the public. So their conclusion that overall, voilà, the media program is making some efforts and supports women in some areas, but some work remains to be done. And in the future, I think they are looking at strengthening collaboration with national and international film funds and institutions such as RIMAGE or also the European Audiovisual Observatory to further exchange data, good practices, and try to ensure that more diverse stories are created, funded, distributed, and promoted when they are made by women. And they will also continue with more mentoring activities, working with professional networks and platforms. So I think, and they, of course, this will remain a priority for the new media program in after 2020, because the Creative Europe program is being renegotiated, has been or is being, I'm not sure exactly the state of play, but has been renegotiated. So voilà, I think this gives you a full overview of what we are doing for the moment in the Commission, and I hope it was interesting.
Thanks very much,
Thank you.
Victoria. So as I said, we'll save questions until the end. So I'm just now going to attempt to escape over to Cecile. Do you want to swap places, or shall I just advance the slides on your behalf?
If you can advance, it's fine.
I will be your charming assistant.
Good afternoon, and many thanks to the AGEMI colleagues for having invited me to this meeting. So just to start with a few words about the Council of Europe, because we are not exactly the same as our big neighbor here. We're based in Strasbourg, if you can move to the first one. We're based in Strasbourg, which is where I am based now, and we have 47 member states. So we go both more to the north and more to the east of Europe, with member state with Iceland, Norway, but also Georgia, Azerbaijan, Switzerland, etc. as member states. And what we do mostly is first standard setting. So we have standards. The most well-known is the European Convention on Human Rights. We do monitoring of these standards, and we also do cooperation projects. Now, in terms of gender equality, gender equality has been on the agenda of the Council of Europe for quite a long time, and here again we do have a series of standards, and we have been working quite a lot on sexism and gender stereotypes, in particular in the media and in education, and also on more specifically on sexist hate speech. So the issue, as we see it in relation to gender equality in the media, as my neighbor said, is both about the media as a profession. So in terms of decision-making, women in decision-making, ownership of media, presence in the newsroom, but also equality in the sector as such, in terms of employment, or in terms of pay, or in terms of access to, or not to safe jobs, but also in relation to media content. And of course, the pictures that we have, if you can move to the next, and the next, the percentage of women heard, read, or seen in the news in Europe back in 2015 was 24. So as you see, it's still very low. And if you move to the next, so this is the result of a project that is organized every 5 years, which is called the Global Media Monitoring Project. If you move to the next one. So it started in 1995, and you see the figures. So the green part is the percentage of women in the news, and what is quite worrying is that it changes and there is progress, but there is actually very slow progress. So this is why we at the Council of Europe think it's a very important issue. The work that we are doing comes both from the gender equality sector in cooperation with the colleagues working on media, who also work on all kinds of very technical issues such as data protection or other legal issues. But we do a lot of work on this, and we do have a number of standards which apply to all the member states of the Council of Europe. So the first, of course, is the Article 10 of the Convention on Human Rights, the right to freedom of expression, which is of course also to be read together with the right to non-discrimination. But as with the directive, we don't have case law which speaks about non-discrimination and or women's rights in media. So there is case law on hate speech in the media, but it's mainly related to racial discrimination. So that it's really an area where going to court may be useful, or try to have some case law there in order to advance things. We also have our convention to fight and prevent violence against women, which is also called the Istanbul Convention, which contains different articles on fighting gender stereotypes and harmful traditions, for example, and also a specific article on the role of media and the responsibility of media in relation to preventing violence against women. So this convention is being monitored, and there will also be recommendations to member states in relation to this particular provision of the convention. Now, the most important standard in relation to gender equality in the media as such is a recommendation from 2013, which actually looks at the whole range of issues in relation to gender equality in the media. It addresses first the member states and asks them to change their policies and legislation in order to promote gender equality in their media-related legislation, or to have specific policies. It's also addressed to media organizations, asking them to do a little bit more in terms of self-regulation, for example, or in terms of codes of conduct. And there's also a number of guidelines or proposals or suggestions that are made in this recommendation in relation to research, to indicators, to awareness raising, and also media literacy. So if you want to know a little bit more about this recommendation, I think if you move to the next one. Yes, we have a handbook which looks at the implementation of this text and gives examples of good practices from different countries, including on legislation, on what NGOs may have been doing, on what media organizations have done, and also suggestions on how to implement this recommendation. Another thing that we have recently done is, which comes from the recommendation, because we at the Council of Europe work also a lot on democracy and all the issues related to elections, good governance, etc. So some part of the recommendation on media looks also at how media can support or hinder good governance and democracy. And so there's a part there which speaks about how media would support women politicians and would support gender equality in relation to elections. And in this regard, or the colleagues from the media sector have done a study on the media coverage of elections with a specific focus on gender equality. So this was looking at different topics. One was, how do media cover campaigns by women? How do they portray women politicians, both in terms of how much and in terms of how, in terms of the images that is conveyed of women politicians, what messages are conveyed to the voters, do these messages of the media have an impact on voters' decisions, and are there mechanisms in place to ensure equality in representation of women and men candidates? Now, the results will not be very surprising to you, although there's very little data, and the need for data and for more research is quite obvious in this area. It's good that we have this one global media monitoring project, because that's all we can quote. Actually, there's so little that we know, but basically this study says that there's more media coverage of male candidates. So it's about 16% of women make about 16% of people seen in the news about politics, which is even less than the average percentage of women in parliament. So we have about 24% women in parliaments in Council of Europe member states, and even less in the media, so that's quite remarkable. Also, in terms of who reports, so that's about who makes the news. In terms of who reports, it's more male reporters on political shows. And of course, women candidates are mostly interviewed on issues that are considered more soft topics. So it's more about culture, education, than about finance or the military. And then, as you can see in this slide, there's the issue of stereotypes in the portrayal of women candidates. You've all seen the heels of Theresa May, but it's also about you very rarely see a man politician asked about his family and who's looking after the children, but that's what you hear all the time about women politicians. It's very sexualized image, but also, and that's more worrying, it's sometimes quite violent, and it can really push women politicians out of the political sphere, in the same way as sexist hate speech can push a lot of women journalists out of social media, for example. So it really is more than just stereotypes, because it does impede freedom of expression, and it does impede political participation. So I guess this is not a very rosy picture that I'm showing, but we're still trying to do things. And for example, at the moment we're just launching, trying to get more data about what's going on, and launching a big survey about what both the member states but also media organizations have been doing in relation to our recommendation. We are also in principle new recommendation on combating sexism as such will be adopted by the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers, hopefully in a few weeks' time. So it's a non-binding instrument, but at the same time it will be the first time that sexism is actually defined at the international level. So once you know a problem, it's always a bit easier to address it, and it contains measures to combat sexism in many different areas, including media and social media. And we are also, of course, quite worried about sexist hate speech, trying to push for this to be as prominent as hate speech in general, because very often when you look at defamation law, for example, gender or women or sexism is not very clearly included. So we're trying to push for better recognition of sexism and sexist hate speech. And I think I'll stop here. Yes, just to say that we also have, as my neighbor said, we have a cinema fund, which is called Eurimage at the Council of Europe, and they do have a very strong gender equality focus, whereby they realized that the movies that they were supporting, the percentage of women-directed movies was very small. So they decided to have a very proactive approach, and they introduced a gender test for the movies, and I think the percentage of women-directed movies have raised by 5 percentage points in the last 5 years. So this is improving, because again we see a lot of women in film schools, but we see quite few women-directed movies, and it's also the role of public funds to be used in order to promote gender equality. And I hope they will continue for sure, because they are very committed. But it's an interesting initiative. And I'll stop here, and happy to receive your questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, a kind of gloomy picture, but also kind of some positive things, which actually segues very nicely, I think, into what Asha is going to be talking to us about. So, over to you, Asha.
Thank you, Karen. It starts off gloomy, though. I'm sorry. We get to the positive afterwards, but it starts off gloomy, so I'll just let you know that now. So my name is Asha Allen. I'm Policy and Campaigns Officer at the European Women's Lobby. We are the largest umbrella organisation for women's civil society in Europe. So we have 2,000 member organisations across 31 countries, and we have European networks as our members, such as the European Disability Forum and the European Network of Migrant Women. So there's a lot of us. That's the basis of it. There's a lot of us. I just wanted to talk to you today and really follow up on Cecile's point in understanding in regards to what we're talking about. And so I kind of also want to have a conversation with you, because I know it's very hot outside, despite the fact that it's February, climate crisis. And I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions to start off with. So in order for us to understand what we're talking about, we can talk about sexist hate speech, we can talk about sexist portrayals in the media, but I wanted to ask you, what do you define as media? You can shout at me if you want to, I don't mind, but throw some answers at me. Newspapers? TV? Radio? Social media? Yep. Video on demand? All of it?
Cinema, web platforms, fiction,
Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Everything.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. So in this room, we have a broader understanding of what we mean by media than our legislation does. Because what it does is it looks at traditional media. We're talking about newspapers, we're talking about TV, we're talking about radio. It has not taken into consideration online media and how imperative it is. So what we need to do really is define the multifaceted nature of what we mean by media in the contemporary context before we can implement strategies in regards to combating this. And this is where our work comes in regards to how we challenge this. And I think in order for us to do that, we need to understand it a little bit better. So in regards to how we can improve our experiences of media, we also need to understand when it was built and who it was built by. And I'll just be very, very blunt. It was male and pale. And it doesn't represent the intersectional perspectives that we need in regards to combating the challenges that we have in media. So for the European Women's Lobby, a couple of years ago in 2017, we engaged on a long process of mapping and understanding the challenges that women and girls face, particularly in online media. This is social media, political engagement, all the social media platforms you could think about, but just generally our relationship with media. And this was called Her Net, Her Rights. There's a hashtag for it. You can check it out. It's pretty cool. And the report was pretty eye-opening. It was the foundational basis for the European Parliament report that was done last year. So the author of our report is also the author of their report, and it also informed the report of the UN Special Rapporteur, who also did a report last year on online violence. And I just wanted to share some of the findings with you in regards to what that report outlined. And we need to go beyond just sexist advertising or inclusion. What we need to understand is that the experiences of women and girls online is a continuum of the violence that we experience in our everyday lives. So violence against women online and online sexist hate speech isn't just limited to a troll, and I use this word in quote marks because trolls don't exist and they don't live under bridges. We're talking about people who engage with other people anonymously online. We are talking about a situation in which we have stalking, we have domestic violence shelters being deliberately targeted if survivors have sought refuge, and so perpetrators will turn up using GPS to find these domestic violence shelters and put everybody else at risk in that position. We have economic violence where perpetrators can empty the bank accounts of women survivors and they are left with no recourse. And we also need to understand that this is a form of violence that can be relived forever. So in our report, we spoke to an amazing activist called Emma Holton, and she explained that the pictures that were shared of her online will always be there, and she can relive this trauma over and over and over again. So we need to look at our relationship in regards to media and understand it in the broader context of how we actually interact with each other socially. Unfortunately, sexist hate speech, our engagement with media has been looked at from a gender-neutral perspective. It's often called just cyberbullying, and they look at it from the youth perspective. So I'm going to just ask you another question. I love questions. How many more times do you think women are likely to be harassed than men online? 10 times? 6 times? Any other guesses? No? It's 27 times more. So you're 27 times more likely to be harassed, stalked, or some form of violence online if you're a woman or a girl. In Europe, 9 million girls by the age of 15 have experienced some form of online violence. So this is a very gendered situation. We can't look at it from a gender-neutral perspective. It's just simply not applicable. So we have to look at the cross-cutting nature of hate speech, and we have to understand that when we talk about it, we need to talk about it in a different way. So you may have heard the term online grooming. You may have heard the term revenge porn. Have you heard any of these terms before? Well, really what they're doing is minimizing what the situation is. Grooming is something that I take my cat to because he can't be bothered to clean himself sometimes, and so we take him to get brushed. He's a very spoiled cat. In regards to revenge porn, in regards to how we look at pornography and how that is deemed in our media, it looks like something that's just between two different people. But we have to understand that this is a form of abuse and it's in a form of violence that we must tackle from that perspective. So we need to look at the language and how we talk about this and be very, very clear that this is a visceral manifestation of inequality between women and men. What we also have to do is, when we have this different understanding of media, is bring in the different stakeholders. So we have regulatory bodies for television media, for newspapers, for radio, but the regulation bodies that we have for tech giants are completely different. And the regulations and directives that we have overseeing those big, large tech companies are very, very outdated. So I'll give you a particular case. Do you know the phrase of third-party responsibility? So you have a website and then someone can post something on it. So in the US, we had, unfortunately, the infamous case of the Backpage.com. And Backpage.com is like Craigslist. You can sell your couch or your refrigerator or your cat, whatever, on this particular website. And the largest form of income they had was through, and I use this again in quotation marks, sexual services. And the majority of the time you realize that a lot of people on these websites were actually sex trafficking victims, and they were children. They were all under the age of 18. And due to the law that was written in 1996, the internet has changed a lot since 1996. I mean, we had dial-up back then, and my mum used to scream at me about getting off the phone and getting on the computer. The regulations that we have then were the ones applied to this particular case. So it took several lawsuits and several cases before Backpage.com was taken down for allowing and for facilitating the selling of children in terms of sex trafficking. So we need to look at the regulations that we have and understand it in a more comprehensive way. So for the European Women's Lobby, we looked at this from different perspectives and we identified certain demographics who were specifically affected by this. Youth being a particular generation in regards to their media literacy, but also female politicians, as Cecile has mentioned. And that brings me to our project. So we have Her Net, Her Rights 2. We're currently implementing this at the moment. And the idea is to provide female politicians, so candidates for the European elections, with the knowledge and understanding, but also the tools and the recommendations in terms of policy and legislation in combating online violence against women moving forward. So we're actually doing 6 rollouts of this training. We're doing it in Austria, Bulgaria, Finland, Italy, Romania and Turkey, and they're starting within the next couple of weeks. And we're also going to be organising one with our partners at S&D and the European Commission from DG Justice in Brussels for European level for MEPs as well. It's an open event, so when we finalise all the details, everyone is invited, of course. And the aim really is to ensure that we provide an environment in which candidates can participate in the political debate, which now happens online, in a safe environment. They understand how they can protect themselves, but also to take into their mandates moving forward this as a key issue that they want to be able to champion as they go forward. So in conclusion, we really must work towards a digital environment that is safe for everyone and not just for the few who created it. We need to qualify, online violence as a cybercrime, which unfortunately is not qualified as yet. We have a lot of different countries that have legislation on sexist hate speech, but they are not uniform. And when you have a situation that can often be international, you don't have the right regulations to be able to deal with it effectively. We also need to recognise that online violence and sexist hate speech is a form of psychological violence that we already have legislation on in order to protect one another. If we keep separating the online and the offline, we will never understand this issue properly. And we can't go ahead in having strategies on getting more women in tech if we don't understand the underlying issues into why women are not going into tech in the first place, or when they do go into technology, they drop out at alarming rates from university courses, or they have terrible experiences while they're there. So before we change the structures, we need to understand the foundations, and it's quite essential that we do that. We need to adopt a multifaceted perspective that is intersectional, and this is imperative. So another example I can give you is, as you may hear from my accent, I'm British. So we may talk about Brexit for about 2 minutes. Really sorry. So we had, I'm sorry, Karen, I had to do it. So in the last general election that we had, it was a snap election. Sorry about that. We had a lot of political engagement online, as most politicians do, in regards to how they interact at the moment. And there was a poll done that showed that the top 10 MPs who received hate speech online were all women. But the number 1 was Diane Abbott. She's a black female politician from London. She's the first black female MP, and she has an amazing, incredible record. And she received 37% of all the hate speech on Twitter that day, and the person below her received 3%. So this is a multifaceted issue that's intersectional. We're not just dealing with a gendered situation, we're dealing with race, sexual orientation, and we need to understand that it needs to be dealt with all those key aspects in mind. So it's not really just up to us in civil society running training programs and putting forward recommendations and working with our institutional partners to recognise the issue. We need to recognise it and understand it. We need to strategize with all of the different intersectional perspectives included, and we need to combat this grave issue head on. If we do nothing now, we will continue going backwards, which is exactly what we're doing. We're looking at creating a generation of female political leaders moving forward who are too scared to participate in the political debate, and we're going to lose any parity that we may have gained in our parliaments and in our discussions online. The civil rights that have been hard won and fought for will begin to be eradicated, and the next generation will inherit a hostile, exclusive and intolerable political environment, and a social one as well. So for the European Women's Lobby, our message is quite clear. We need to create a safe digital environment for everybody, not just for some. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Asha. Just to say that we now have very kindly Michaela Sodrova, the MEP who was slightly delayed. So really pleased to welcome you. Thank you very much for walking over the road and giving us some time today. We really appreciate that.
I don't know if it's possible to start now, just now.
Just, Michaela, just go for it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for invitation. Thank you very much for this event, this opportunity to share our experience, our point of view. Because I'm in politics 20 years almost, but the first Monday in European Parliament. But I was a long time in National Czech Assembly. I would like to speak about our experience with our report, Gender Equality in Media Sector. It was a report which we concluded last year on symbolically on 8 March as Women's Day, International Women's Day. It was a very good celebration when we supported very strongly the women and campaign Me Too and so on, because it's a very topical debate on this. But it continues, it's not finished. Unfortunately, it's not finished. We have to fight against this abusing and so on. So why did we do this report? Because something is wrong, something is not balanced, and we want to change it. So the media have great deal of influence over politics and society. They even shape public opinion. They co-create reality. So that's why it is important to have a good female-male balance, because this influence of media is so important. It's fourth pillar of democracy. So co-create the reality. So we have to be included as women. We have to influence. We have to participate on this. In the media sector, there are many female workers, and also in universities, they are in the majority as journalism graduates. But they are not well represented in management or decision-making posts and positions responsible for producing content. It's produced some disbalance in the content, in the environment in these media companies. As a consequence, male perspective and points of view are predominant in media content. Statistics show that women account for only 24% of what we hear, what we watch and read in the media. Just this, it's really no balance, and it's not enough this presentation. We must therefore take care to address the absence of female-oriented content and viewpoints. For this reason, we must create a better balance. And we studied why and what is the cause of this underrepresentation in media, because we have the female workers, but why is this situation in reporter and so on? So women have a greater challenge to reconcile their maternal and professional duties because they are attached to their families. So it is the very recent reason, and we should offer them as much support as possible. So to change the conditions work and the conditions of work. My report focused on the situation of women working in the media as reporters or commentators. It highlighted the fact that they are insufficiently represented as reporters on hard news and serious topics and experts on some issues, some important issues. A special chapter was devoted to the image of women in the media and the advertising industry, where they are subject of stereotypes or even sexism. The situation is similar in the area of new social media. So the report fortunately remained factual and rational without ideological input. So I was quite happy with the result. I can list the main recommendations of the report. They were the following. Now I would like to mention 7 recommendations. What we have to do. What is the good way to change the situation? So more responsibility for media organizations and national regulations in terms of gender equality. So this is the first. Second, voluntary and internal self regulation of companies and other support measures for women in media organizations. So to support for women on board. Support and promotion to campaign against sexism in advertising. For example, we have example in Czech competition Sexist PG. Fourth, a suggestion that media organization establish database of women experts in a number of areas. It's example from Belgium example. Fifth is more intensive fight against discrimination and harassment of women in the media. So campaign on the national level and international. Sixth is better approach to work-life balance issues, given to fact that work in media is often demanding, for example, inflexible hours, frequent traveling, a competitive environment, freelance and self-employment rates quite high. So I think this is very important for women to prepare better work conditions. Seventh is a resolute approach against violence against female investigative journalists. We mentioned the case of assassinated Maltese journalist Daphne Galizia, so it was in this time very recent. The report was not suggesting any regulation at EU level in this field, but self-regulation and co-regulation as well as subsidiarity are the leading principle. So it's some incentives for media companies. So to conclude, let me say one personal remark. I am not a really feminist or gender activist, but I am a much more conservative politician. But I am the strong partisan of equality between women and men. I don't want the potential of women to be lost. It's the first, because our society loses women potential if they are not present on the government board, in the media, in the management of company, the management in the high post of public administration. So we lose if we don't push the women in this post. I don't want this losing, and I am against any injustice in this field. Mine is an approach based on human dignity and human rights. I am happy that the report in the end reflected this both reasonable and humanistic approach rather than ideological one. I apologize that I have to say it, because sometimes our European Parliament, we are split because some ideological approach. I refuse it. I think our principle is European values, human rights, human dignity, freedom, and this value. If we will fulfill this value, I think we are able to help to this gender equality, this gender balance, and we have to do it if we don't want to lose women potential. So thank you very much. Maybe if you have some questions, some remarks, I would like to answer you. And then I have to go to vote in FEM committee, because we have very important directive, work-life balance. It's very good. I hope very successful. It's very Lion. It's with this report, because we have to prepare better conditions for women in the media. So thank you very much.
Because Michaela is a bit more time limited than pretty much everyone else, we can direct some questions or comments to Michaela. Thank you very much for giving us a little bit of time in between voting. That's really helpful. Yep.
Hi, I'm a Brussels-based journalist, and I was very interested in what you said about
Maybe would you like to
You can just come.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that.
You have to stand up.
Hi, I'm a Brussels-based journalist, and I was interested in what you said. Are you saying that the main driver of there being so little gender equality in media is the difficulty of combining work with children? Because I agree with what you said. When I went to journalism school, 2 in 3 people were women. The men were a minority. But right now, when I'm in my 30s, I see that the number of women are dropping out. And my counterpoint would be that rather than balancing work with private life, it's a lot of nepotism. In the 7 years that I've worked as a journalist, it's a lot of nepotism. Journalism can seem like a pretty impenetrable world that is very dominated by men.
You are right, but I have to say that I have very good experience with women as journalists. I know many women, very good journalists, but it's true that there are some obstacles for them. If you want to have children, families, it's very difficult to meet everything. So, but I think that the time, that's why I worked on this report, because I wanted to highlight this issue that we want to have women journalists. If we want to have women journalists, we have to support them. Yeah, it's understandable for you. If not, they will have so many obstacles that only one small percentage will stay, will be able to work there. It's pity. So if we want to have women in media, good journalists, we have to support. But, for example, if we are speaking more generally about, for example, filmmakers, in the last years, the Lux Prize Awards they are filmmakers, women who won. This last year it was women filmmakers. Before also, they are very successful women filmmakers, but they are not so represented as male. But if they are very successful. So it's I think it is necessary some more of pushing of society as a demand. Is a little bit the same in politics. I know it. Because in politics, for example, on the European level, in European Parliament, there are 40% women. It's good. In Czech Republic, we have 20% women in the parliament, so it's a half of percentage. But the voters, they demand women in politics. So I think if they are demand, will be maybe also more of offer of government, of policies and so on. So I think this pushing of society is very, very important. And I think also from this European Parliament, I published this report. I discussed in Czech Republic, in other countries, we have many events about these issues. And I think that we can change this opinion, this environment to be more accessible, more comfortable for women, to more supportive. I hope this, and we have to do it. I don't know if this is enough for you, this answer. Maybe it was more some comments, but I support, I do it my personally. If I can, I every time I welcome women as journalists. Many times I had on stages as trainership for women and journalists also. So it's very, very useful, and to do something practical and something efficient for them. And I'm sure that women are very ambitious, are very able, are very talented. Just some little support and they will have very good results, I'm sure.
Well, that's a lovely positive message
for
all of us.
I have confidence.
Yes, and if there are more MEPs like you, Michaela, I'm sure that we will get there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, sir.
Any other quick questions for Michaela before she goes off to vote?
So we can stay in touch. So
Yes,
if it's something necessary, I would like to really to continue discussion and our relationship. So have a nice afternoon, have a nice event, and good luck for your work. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, when Michaela is going, so we're actually now going to have a kind of quick break, comfort break. There's some, sorry, Pamela's trying to get my attention. Yes, sorry. Yes. How rude of me. Just, yes, any other questions for our glorious panel here? Go on, abuse your position.
Okay, I made all this effort to get a mic. I had one question because you all, I think most of you, I'm Pamela Morinier, I'm from the European Federation of Journalists. You all mention sexism, hate speech in some way, except maybe for Victoria. But it's actually a very big issue in journalism. So what are the legal tools that women journalists can use to make a difference? Because we know that many of our colleagues are experiencing cyber violence, stalking, impersonation of Facebook accounts, lots of different things. Many of them don't even dare to report these threats of rapes actually also, because they have no hope that anything is going to change. They don't have any hope that their issue is going to be taken seriously, both in the newsroom, but also at the police station. So what can be done? What can they do? What kind of advice would you give to women journalists and other people? Because it has a chilling effect on everybody, actually.
Anyone can answer that one.
Maybe all of us can try. Well, I guess from the legal side, some of it is there because hate speech is a criminal offense, so it should be penalized. From the practical side, I think it's good that people speak up and make sure that they are not isolated. and that's valid for women journalists, that's valid for all of us in any case of violence at work or anywhere else. So I guess it's a question of speaking out, but also of training everybody, from the kids to the journalists to the parents, on what sexism is, what hate speech is, and that actually it's not acceptable. But and it's a long way. And probably in terms of the platforms, there's still a lot to be done in relation to regulation. I'm not sure if the UK report that was just released speaks about all these issues, but it's more about privacy and that kind of thing. So it shows that some issues in relation to regulation of social platforms are moving or could be moving, but that in terms of the issues that we're talking about here, there's much more that needs to be done, and also just to recognize sexism at the same level as racial hate speech, because there's for the very, even from my colleagues I hear that, oh, but sexism, that's it's only a joke. But I think we need to recognize this, you know, the picture of the iceberg where you have sexist jokes at the very bottom and rape or murder at the top, but make that recognize that continuum of violence, that it does matter. And as Asha was saying, online violence is violence, and it's not more acceptable than any other form of violence. But my dear colleagues surely also have very useful answers to give.
So sorry, and I forgot to mention that on the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, we have prohibition of hate speech also based on sex, and that applies to audiovisual media services, so the traditional TV and more video on demand services. But we also have in the revision of the directive recently now this provision applying to also video sharing platforms, so YouTube and the likes. But of course, this is only part of the answer, because the only thing they are obliged to do is to put in place some measures like flagging and reporting. So I understand that you say that then women don't even dare using it because they fear they will not be taken seriously. But at least, voila, this is the first step. Those measures have to be in place. I think that the rest is a lot also about awareness raising, speaking up, and about media literacy. I think now the more I hear about it, the more convinced I'm getting. And this is something we have not yet explored, but it's also something we are working on. So in our unit. So I think this is also food for thought that I will be taking back to the office with me. So.
Just to kind of agree with what my colleagues are saying, but maybe just some more advice on what you could do right now, because a lot of things that legislation takes a lot longer than digital is moving, because it's moving 10 times faster than in terms of implementing the structures that we need. Precisely. So one of as I mentioned, one of the things is to really identify that this is already associated with a form of violence that's already legislated against, right? So psychological violence. So we now have cases in which someone has now been prosecuted based on our online sexist hate speech that you can refer to. So we had a recent case in Ireland, we had the case in Germany, we had a case in Italy, and so we now have cases at European level that people can refer to in regards to what qualifies as hate speech. The other message from us really is that it's not entirely your responsibility. As a survivor, as someone experiencing this, for any of you as well, it's not on you to not feed the troll or ignore what they're doing, right? So there are actual feminist online communities that help you with that. So one of them that we love is called Heart Mob. You can check them out online. If you're experiencing any kind of form of online violence, you message them and they just flood your page with positive, loving messages. For some reason, it's really beneficial to actually have a community who's willing to protect you. And a lot of them are actually people who understand the media legislation, so they can refer you to the right place in how you quantify something. We also do have changes in legislation happening because of really amazing activists. So we have Gina Martin in the UK. She recently got upskirting made illegal, which is where people were taking pictures under women's skirts and then sharing them on platforms online. Also, just to let you know that there are some communities that are actually working to change the structures that currently don't have legislation on them. So one of the biggest issues is that you have these huge platforms that people quantify as a public space. Facebook is not a public space, it's a private company with its own rules and regulations. So what we are trying to do at the Women's Lobby is to create a code of conduct between the major tech companies, so they have responsibility that they voluntarily agreed to. And I believe with the hate speech, this is a similar thing. There's been a code of conduct in regards to the communication with the Commission on what they will monitor. But of course they don't have the structures to understand what we're talking about, right? So we can't just go to an organization and say you need to be able to point out sexist hate speech if they don't have women in the room telling them what it is. So we at the Women's Lobby, we've become YouTube trusted flaggers so that we can help them understand from a feminist perspective what quantifies as sexist hate speech and what quantifies as online violence. So I can definitely share resources to help you at this moment in time. Just really re-emphasize the point that you don't have to deal with this alone, and point you in the right direction for the legislation that already protects you, and what you can say to the local authorities that you may come across, which commands them to have to respond based on the law that is already there.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Actually, I would like to do not a question, more comments. In fact, I'm Lama from IAVI. We are working in media literacy, and I'm responsible about campaign. It's called Building Trust Between Migration, Refugee, and Citizens. So, in fact, against also hate speech and disinformation. From my experience, that I recognize that maybe. The good solution could be for the future when we will really share the awareness with all the citizens, specifically now the youth target, and to tell them how that the negative image and disinformation and hate speech in the media, how can affect negatively in all the society. So I'm trying now also to change the strategy with my campaign, because it's not enough just to publish a hashtag or online campaign or just a training. We already have a very great previous experience with the journalists before, and to discuss and share awareness with journalists. But now we are focusing more about the citizens and the youth and the students who are still in study time. So this was my comment, and thank you for your invitation.
One of the things that's actually useful just from having this discussion is, as you'll see after the break, I mean, we're very much encouraging all of you to give us examples of good practices, because part of what we're trying to do with AGEMI is exactly to share that good practice. So, you know, we're definitely going to be sharing Heart Mob. I love that idea. Flooding our accounts with love. Why wouldn't we want that? So we are going to be making, I'm making an appeal now for you to kind of just send us your examples of good practice, but we're also going to be talking about that after the break. Any other questions? Yep.
Hi, my name is Ophélie Masson. I work for an NGO called End FGM, Female Genital Mutilation. So it's also more of a comment, the person who spoke previously. So we indeed witness a lot of violence on social media because we work with communities. And so indeed what you were talking about, Asharlin, we see a lot of sexism mixed with racism and very offensive comments about religion as well, because there's this belief that FGM is linked to a specific religion when it's not. So I guess I also have a question actually in my comment, which is, do you know any tools or any movements that maybe help women to fight from an intersectional perspective hate speech online? Maybe.
Yeah, I guess I can answer that one. Yeah, so we actually have a resource pack that documents the tools that you can use that also work from an intersectional perspective. But also that there are things now developing. There's a lot of different initiatives that are happening at the moment. So there's Glitch UK, which is run by a wonderful person called Sei. She is setting up it's an organization that goes into schools and teaches young boys and girls specifically on what is online abuse. But yes, there's also Feminist Internet, who are also really cool. We have Take Back the Tech, which is an organization online that also can provide you with tools on what you can do, and they very much come from an intersectional perspective. But this is also something that we at EWL want to do moving forward in terms of the next logical step from our initial reports to our trainings and then what comes next. So I'm happy to share that with you guys. I mean, we work with NDFGM really closely, so we can send that to you and share it with everyone here, of course, as well. But there are quite a few initiatives at the moment, but they do come from very, very different perspectives in terms of what they're bound by in terms of legislation. So we're really looking at trying to do something at European level that's in line with the directives and with the code of conducts that we have at the moment.
And you'll find the same type of networks in all the countries, also Francophone feminist organizations that do this specific work, either directly with victims or to provide support on legislation. So we can talk on the French part if you want. And we have some resources on the sexist hate speech part of the website, where we also have some organizations listed.
So one of the things that we can do is, for everyone who's here that registered through the Eventbrite page, we can then just email everyone with those resources, because that's probably the most straightforward way to get those kind of URLs to you. So we will do that. Thanks. Right, I definitely think it is now time for a break. So we'll have a short break and 15 minutes, and then maybe 15 minutes. Come back at 4:20. Thank you very much. Can we just thank our brilliant panel just once again? Saying really kind of useful and sensible things.
Hi, I just wanted to come say hi. I'm Martina from DG Justice, and hi. And we were also in contact by email. Yes.
Definitely, I'm not sure I'm the only person in DigiConnect. The next thing I get to you, voila. We know you very, very well. And other colleagues also on DigiConnect are also working on that, so I'm not the only one.
I was listening to
put you in touch. Very interesting. Both your presentations and also maybe the representation of sexism. Is there a new
okay, so do you work with Halidi? Yes, exactly.
Oui, il y a le projet.
I was just listening to you say that you're working on a code of conduct for the platforms, because we are two.
Okay,
specifically on women, online violence against women. It's really new, so I was just listening to you two. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we propose some recommendations for code of conduct. So our project has our rights to legal. So for us, it was good to have so many organisations involved, so they're pretty happy for us to be part of this. So we could bring certain elements into it.
Yeah, it would be perfect. So that what doesn't happen is that we do something. So basically we're just waiting for cabinet and hours to clear our ideas. It's most likely also going to be a code of conduct separate from the racism code of conduct, because there are some
Would it be like have those elements inside it though?
there is just, as you might guess, a problem with the legal basis. So I was also listening now to her say that there is actually a legal basis. Audio-visual media directive, but it's not that straightforward because it's only the audio-visual part. So it seems that we should be going to the direction of having just something with the platforms on a voluntary basis, similarly if it goes as we planned, then we'll have the first meeting with the platforms. What was it?
With gender equality in the digital sector.
March already. March,
So
April.
when you bring in different stakeholders.
Okay.
Yeah, little by little. Yeah.
And good stuff.
So anyway, but check it out. Really good, and we would be super happy to include.
Nécessité par le rapport de l'écran.
Style attacked her. No, it's an interesting topic, and it's clearly super popular.
Yeah, we know there's a lot of discussion about it in the last 6 months. Secretary General went to the DPP back in December with Commissioner Rover. We worked really closely with her cabinet, and I think so much about online violence. It's one thing.
Thank you so much for delivering such an interesting presentation. I was just wondering if you use algorithms or tools to detect the inappropriate speech, because in programming.
But yeah, I was just saying that we're initiating work on the code of conduct on hate speech against women, and I don't know if you're
inappropriate or like bad
I wanted to ask, my name is Claudia Padovani, I'm from the University of Cordova, so I'm part of the AGEMI consortium, but I've also been collaborating with APC, so Tech Tech and some of their activities, and the kind of work that I've done here was mostly, apart from taking care of the platform and creating this resource bank of good practices, but I'm interested in policy development.
Exactly,
So I understand that you've been working a lot more in areas like digital development, which I
knows
also
what everybody's
interested in, so we may be in touch.
Our organization should be adopted as a
I went to,
okay.
yeah, I'll give you my card.
bad way and people
Well, basically there's, I mean, AGEMI is, it contains now learning resources and different units. One of the units is on policy aspect, so we're mentioning kind of the legal framework and the background and what challenges we have to policy development. But I made, I applied to a Volkswagen Foundation kind of grant, and I'm waiting to see what they think. But the idea there is to compare 5 different countries from around the world in terms of their approach to gender equality in digital strategies. I mean, yes. You are?
Thank you for that. A lot of our education work is within our broader framework. Essentially, so that's why I think so. What we want to do is kind of bring cohesiveness to all of that.
And is there working group at European So maybe we can be in touch, because I'm waiting for Volkswagen to say we're interested in this. If that happens, that's going to be like relevant money to do work from Mexico to the Philippines, Namibia, Italy and Sweden, for a number of reasons, but because of colleagues based in different places. But I think the way we create a framework for the analysis, if that can be consistent to other studies being done in other places, then you have a lot more than the 5 countries, and at the same time that could inform activities and exploration that are being done. So we'll be in touch.
Yeah, if you could contact me, because we're doing a scoping and a mapping now of this in regards to what's the most relevant in regards to the specific policies that we're looking at. So then it could be good to help kind of, we want to shape that with external actors as well, academics, with legislators, so that we have a really kind of concrete understanding, because the EU is bringing in their new digital strategy in the next semester, and we're very interested in. At the moment, we see nothing with gender in there, so we want to try and.
So that's the point.
Yeah.
Now there's a couple of things that may be of interest. A student of a colleague of mine from Jamaica did something like exploring Jamaican digital strategies on a gender from a
Come back to the right box.
few years ago. So that was a master level, but it was one of the first studies, like 5 years ago, that was done precisely on this. The approach I'm taking is I'm building on feminist political analysis literature, so bringing in a lot more the political science kind of approach, when you understand how different ways in which gender equality is understood, and then the process of policy development and then implementation, because that's the other aspect which is very relevant. And so it's very open again. It's like a beginning, but I think it's interesting to know that you're doing what you're doing.
Watch out. Greetings.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for delivering such an interesting.
So is it okay if I sit and use tools to track assault appropriate behavior decisions? And say with that works with linguistics, so maybe they detect words that are not appropriate.
Yeah, but we can use an hour, and then yes, yeah.
So we simply just don't have the capacity to monitor.
Or we can hook this to something else. You can hook it to mine. If I need to be roaming for some time, then we can just switch. Yeah, but it's okay. I think it's good if we start. I was just suggesting that I can maneuver your slides so that then I switch and I go onto the platform.
Yeah. So we're looking for funding essentially to be able to start doing that in order to have a system in which we can monitor, particularly for the first time I've gone
no, it's here. It's the NFL European network.
Because what we
I think I remembered it being S something at the end, so maybe it is.
Okay, well in the US there's SGN/C.
I'm thinking I haven't ever heard. Okay, it's so
and then move forward. But then the other question is our rights to access. So we have some of the and the other question is, do we want to
anyway from our side? So it's starting to be
a private message. So there's loads of different factors that we're looking into.
Because my friends and I, we worked on some algorithms and the hackathon like for developers, and very interesting solutions were developed to track the social media. One was Chile for Russian conductor, social media network, and it actually worked. So they, what they did is they monitored the messages and comments when unappropriate. So they measured the taxation of how the message is toxic, right? Yeah, and if you exceed a certain level, right, it just blocks and it's not without any further discussions, right? They just yes. I was pure pressure, and the thing is they didn't have enough resources to maintain the system because it was just an exercise, but then they there's like huge funding to anything on the commission or like and the your approach is very different and so the board group and maybe this might be as an example to others. Stop doing this. But the regulators are really for workers, they can coming to the pages and giving likes. It's very, very nice. Everything's new.
And of course, the narrative of the situation.
Yeah.
It's happening to
so I also did my
so for us it's very, very
more specifically, I researched like how they were.
But it is just to understand it from a different perspective.
Yeah, but we see so what we do is in our
decision to algorithms are required.
So such things yeah, but I'm also finding a lot of research that like makes it seem like not that difficult.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's like moving in a more equal representation. I see all the limitations. It's really, there are a lot of proposals and
yeah.
So that they can bring that to it. So it's really big piece of work that's slowly
with some being quite
Maybe you may consider taking as an organization part in the hackathon to come up with a challenge so that people from just outside will come and bring something on the table just to raise attention. Because now companies are joining hackathons and taking it as a and the programmers with a really good background are coming and doing the continue as they will. So you might start a little bit. I would personally really like to work with this.
I just think it's great to be
Yeah.
Yeah, we are working.
This is something Julia.
Oh my God, yes.
yeah.
But right now, I'm it's why it's really important that we do studies
Or how
very hard work. So that I can't even put much about it. Certainly with people, even educated, so in a country where you're designed and
Which are you aware of, the president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is really, really committed, and she's now on this campaign against violence against women politicians, which is called Not in My Parliament. There was a study by IPU and the Parliamentary Assembly, but she's very, if you need she's from Switzerland, so it's not EU, but she's very committed. And they'll do something new for March 8th about Parliament, so it may link nicely with the campaign that you're doing for the European elections. Because I just commented on the recommendation that we have about violence against women politicians, which will be adopted, I think, next week or next week. And there's a hashtag, Not in My Parliament.
I hope to make a good contribution.
And say hi to Joanna. I was late and then I had to eat something. And we'll have somebody from the Hungarian Women's Lobby talk to our conference in Helsinki about pornography.
So maybe that's what I want to focus on.
I noticed this when I came to Scotland.
But again, it's heartbreaking.
It's always a difficult question.
But there's some references in the recommendational section. If you could write to some of the committee of ministers, some of the firm reps, just to say we like it, if you like it, like maybe just the recommendation. Yes.
If you send it to me, and then maybe target
the firm reps. So yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, just a quick question. Can I get actually your email address, please? Actually, I was going to ask for the same. And so I'll email you, well, I don't know, maybe you'll send all these tools that you mentioned, these sites, thank you, about like tools and websites and movements that we mentioned. Reach out to get some support, because we have a youth ambassadors program, for instance.
We met them last week.
Yeah, you did, right? And so, like, I want to support them in that because like they're making themselves visible on social media more and more, and I feel like they need to know how to protect themselves, basically. Also.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just email me and I'll send it on.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming also.
Sorry, just a question. I'm actually just looking for maybe the possibility of an internship or a part-time job. I have a little over 6 months to offer, so soon. So I wanted to see, can I send you an email with my CD or should I look online?
You can send us an email, but literally just closed our applications for interns. So that they start. But we'll do it again in September. Yes. Okay. So we take 3 interns every year, and paid ones, so we just.
And so every year they start in April.
It depends. Normally, sometimes it starts in
So you haven't got a nameplate, and Pamela hasn't got a nameplate. You don't care?
Yeah, we have. I don't care actually, but
You use a lot more language that I'm familiar with. I study in the UK. Most of the words that I yeah. Thank you very much.
That's mine.
Hello. Okay. I think we can start with the second part of our seminar. I hope you had your coffee. Okay, I think it's time to go a little bit deeper in the project first outputs. The main one is the project web platform, and thanks to Karen Ross, a professor from Newcastle University and project leader, and Claudia Padovani, associate professor from University of Padova, we will discover all the contents and functionalities of this web platform. And thanks to Aude as well, we will we will have some testimonials about the concrete action which has been organized by the project, because it's good to know about initiatives and recommendation and etc. But now it's time to be concrete. So I would like to give the floor to Claudia or Karen. You will start to introduce the project, of course, and in particular our web platform.
Thank you, Eleanor. And also just to say again that Eleanor and Pamela and Sarah are also involved in the platform, and we'll see something of that work. Also just to say that because this is a European Commissioned funded project, they're very keen on making sure that they've got value for money. So on the table at the end, at the back there, is a questionnaire. So if you could just, it would take you 5 minutes at the end of it just to fill in that questionnaire. That will be so super helpful. Obviously helpful if you say nice things. But also helpful if you know, we're also open to constructive criticism. So, but having said that, as I said at the very beginning, this is where we're launching the platform because we actually have something to show you, but it is a work in progress. It isn't finished, but there are a number of elements on there which are finished, which, you know, at some point tomorrow, next week, next month, you can actually go on there and hopefully, as I said, find something of interest and use, and progressively find more things of interest and use as the project develops. So we're going to do a bit of a kind of double act here, myself and Claudia. Together we've worked quite a lot on the platform, so we're just going to flip between us, as you will see, and hopefully it won't be too disjointed. Okay, this is who we are. This is the panel. So Claudia, myself, and Aude Stenner. And Aude will introduce herself at an appropriate point, but we're just very pleased. You'll see why Aude is here. Apart from being a jolly nice person, she actually has a very particular function on this panel, and she will describe what that function is a bit later. But thank you, Aude. So, when we were thinking about developing this project, when we got the funding on that happy day, having tried several times to get the project funded, we were thinking about who is the audience for AGEMI, And because the consortium comprises both academics and media professionals, we recognised that what we wanted to produce was a platform or a set of resources which would be helpful for lots of people. But as I said at the beginning, our kind of key issue is about building bridges, and primarily building the bridge between education and employment, building a bridge between journalism media students and the media and journalism profession, so that when our students graduate, they come into a context where they kind of understand what's going on. And hopefully, if they come in more gender aware, that's the generation that's going to change things. So for us, it's very much about trying to kind of show that relationship between education and employment. So our primary target, in many ways, are students, both our own students in the consortium, but also students generally, because the purpose, what we want to happen is when all the resources are up there, they're all accessible, they're just free. They're free to download. They're free for anyone, any of you in this room, anywhere in the world, to go on the platform, download anything of interest, incorporate it in people's, their own training activities. So when we're thinking about the audience, we were thinking about, okay, so we can see how our students would be interested in this, because we're going to force them to take a module on gender and media. We're going to force awareness on our students. So we can imagine students might take this as a whole course, because part of what we're doing in terms of the online resources is producing a module which students could take as a course. But those resources, the different resources which we'll show you in a second, can also be accessed. So you're a busy journalist and a story breaks, yet another story breaks around harassment of women journalists. You can go onto the website and you can then put in some keyword searches, and you can then find something that we have produced around that topic, or a set of resources which you can access on that topic, or some women journalists talking about the experience of gender-based violence. So we're imagining these different kinds of audiences. The key thing is you've got to know that the platform exists. That's one. So that's a kind of key issue for us, how we extend knowledge about the platform so it actually does, it has traction and it gets used. So we're imagining students, we're imagining media professionals going on, finding out, okay, so your media organisation wants to set up a training resource or a training course for women leaders. Well, if you go on the platform, you could put in some keyword searches and you could find other examples from other media organisations who have done that. So it's very much about good practices, about sharing good practices. But we also, as we saw from the earlier session, we're hoping to be able to provide something of interest to Cecile in the Council of Europe, or Michaela as an MEP, so that, I can't resist saying this. What was really interesting, I think, about what Michaela was talking about when she was talking about ideology and saying how she didn't really want to, she didn't believe in ideology, but then she then proceeded to talk about all the things which are the tenets of feminism, which anyway, that's a slight aside. So we're just thinking these three kinds of user: students, kind of media professionals, and basically everyone else, NGOs, women's organisations, people who might have any passing or concerted interest in the kind of gender equality agenda. Okay, so what we've done so far. So we've created a website which hopefully, as long as the technology doesn't let us down, we will kind of show you what the website looks like. We've designed a resources bank of good practices, which is something that Claudia has been spending. She's actually much younger than she looks, because she has spent so much time developing the resources bank of good practices. Yet
it was a demanding task.
But Claudia and her team at the University of Padua have just been so brilliant at actually constructing both the web platform but also the resources bank of good practices. And I think hopefully we'll see the fruits of your endeavours. It's not completed yet, but that is something we've been doing. we've developed the GMAP, which is, again, as Claudia will show you, is a global map of organisations which are doing good things. And any of your organisations, we will be like, if you're doing good things, let us know, because we'll put your organisation up on the GMAP. We've developed some of the learning resources. So as I said, what we're constructing is a 10-unit course, each unit being on a different topic. So we've developed 5 of them. We've completed 5 of them. We've got 3 which are almost completed and 2 in development. So 5 are on the platform now. You can look at them, you can download them, they're finished. And then the others are in various states of completion. But they will all be completed by the time the project, unfortunately, finishes its funding at the end of July. We've designed, yes, the ACT app. ACT is Assess, Challenge and Transform. Yes, it's 9 themes and 1 introduction, just for Pamela's tweeting purposes. So we've developed an app which at some point in the next month or 2 will be available on the App Store and on the iPhone store and in the Android store, but not quite ready yet. But it's almost ready, and we can show you a mock-up of what it will look like when it's done. We've done a number of interviews. The other thing, again, that Claudia will talk about is we've interviewed a number of media professionals about their experiences in those different themes, which we will show you in a second. So media professionals who are talking about issues around violence, around representation, around advocacy, around kind of policy making, so that when you see the online learning resources, some of it is just us talking directly to camera as a mini lecture, but then that's interspersed with other interviews with other people who are working in the field and with other things, tasks and things like that. We road tested some of those materials at a summer school, which was in August in Gothenburg, which was a week, had 30 students involved, 10 from each of the 3 universities, and they got together, and this is why Aude is here, because she was one of those students, to do various things, which she will kind of talk about. And we're also now, at this point in February, we're almost at the end of the internship program. So all the students who took part in the summer school are also now they've completed or are completing, like Aude, their internships. So again, this was part of this idea of trying to make that bridge between education and employment by giving students an opportunity to work in a media organisation or an organisation that has a media element, for example, European Women's Lobby. So, and then so as part of our effort at sustainability, because when the project finishes in July this year, that's it. We've built something, we've developed something, we think it's very worthwhile and meaningful, but we need to kind of find a way to enable it to continue to have some existence other than just being a static website. So part of what we're doing there is working with other organisations, thinking about how to package some of the materials in different ways for different audiences, so that we kind of leverage a bit more activity and reach of the resources.
Now we try, if the connection is good enough, then it will be time to have a look at this platform, which is this, that I hope you can see. So we're just going to provide a few information, give you a sense of what the platform looked like, so that you have a basic instruction on how to navigate, and then you can go back and spend more time, but at least to give a sense of what we've been doing and why we have conceived this project as it is. So of course, AGEMI, the logo and homepage is just giving you a short introduction to the project. Karen is also speaking a couple of minutes to say what the project is about, as she did today. And then we have 4 main blocks of activities that characterize the project. We'll be looking at, in some details, at some of this. And the first one is actually the database of good practices. I would say when we started designing this project, this was the very first thing we had in mind, because the call from the European Commission was actually to develop something that had to do with dissemination of good practices. Now, something that we should say is that Karen, myself, Elena Chiaberge, Pamela, and also Maria Edstrom, we all were coming from not only long years working on issues related to gender and media, but we're all involved in other networks, in international networks across Europe and beyond. And so we thought, you know, there are so many interesting things happening in different places that certainly that we thought it would have been certainly an added value, the possibility to bring some of those good practices together, and therefore we conceived this as a hub. And then, because of the concept that Karen was sharing with you, that we tried to bridge with the professional world and to look outside the academia and try to adopt also a different language, which is not just the theoretical and methodological aspect, then we thought, beside the good practices, a number of other elements would come in. So just to give you a sense of what this resource, we call it resources bank, it's actually a database. And if you go to like good practices, there is one page that describes a bit what this is. The one thing that we think is relevant is that we're not only collecting good practices from Europe, from European countries, because we thought from the very beginning that actually in many cases we can learn from amazing practices that are being developed from Latin America to the Northern African countries, thanks to our network. And so the data set started out from the very beginning as a global resource. And at the same time, we thought, you know, this whole project should make sense not only to people who are working in Europe, teaching in Europe, or you know, operating as media professionals in Europe. So this kind of global approach is there. And then, of course, as we were collecting different good practices, we had to create some kind of a template and a framework for us to understand what do we mean by good practices and what kind of good practices we wanted to have in there. And so there's a little elaboration on this, whereby good practices, they go from monitoring projects that were mentioned even in the previous session, to awareness-raising activities, campaigns, educational and training, gender equality policies and codes. So many of the specific initiatives that were mentioned by the previous speakers, we do think they can be good practices worth to be shared and known. And then on the other side, because of the intersectional kind of approach that was mentioned also before, we try to identify all the different forms of inequality that may relate to gender issues and challenges in the media and through the media. And thereby we have, of course, issues we understand, and we have included issues of representation, stereotype, portrayal, but also the working condition, the gender pay gaps, access to decision making, the role that technology is having in transforming the profession. So there are a number of issues there. Now, the way you can visualize this resources bank, and as Karen says, we've been working on this, of course, for some time, but now it's like halfway, and of course we would like a lot more good examples to be included in there. You can visualize in 3 different manners. The one that we believe is kind of more intriguing is this, as a bubble search, whereby you identify, you have filters there, and so you can search for type of good practice in relation to the type of inequality issue that is addressed. And so in the bubbles here, you have, for instance, independent monitoring. Okay, so in this case, what you visualize are bubbles that are the type of good practice. Or you can have awareness-raising initiative. So if you click here and you're dealing with awareness-raising initiative, these initiatives may actually address different type of issues. So harassment and abuse, for instance, that was widely mentioned before, right? So here we have collected a few examples of campaigns and awareness-raising initiative that tackle specifically the issue of harassment and violence and abuse. And if you do click on any of these, like the Everyday Sexism Project, for instance, you're taken to a page which is the profile of the specific initiative, whereby you have basic information. You have the link to the actual website, you have a short description of the good practice, you know more or less where it is based, who is the organization that's promoting this, okay? So that's the idea, that by doing this, or vice versa. You can also change how you want to filter this. And in this case, you are entering the data set thinking, what kind of issue am I concerned with? And then you go and look for the type of good practice. So that requires a little bit of navigation to see if, but what we think is interesting in this case is that if you have an issue of interest or if you're interested in a very specific type of good practice like monitoring activities, for instance, you may discover things that you're not familiar, that you're not aware of, and they may provide some inspiration or ideas or model for you to do something else, right? The other way in which you can actually search this is also through a more traditional kind of semantic search, whereby you have the whole list of good practices. And in this case, you would just be inputting some key terms in here, considering that the whole semantic search is built on the text of the description for every good practice. So if I'm interested in decision making, for instance, I would get... No, great. Interested in decision making, I would just get suggestion on the kind of good practices that we have included that tackle that type of issue, or if we're interested in campaign, or if we're interested in codes of conduct, right? So this is just to give a sense, and of course you need to navigate. Something that is very, very relevant for us is the fact that through these good practice, half of these good practices we have collected ourselves, building on previously existing resources, like for instance the Council of Europe handbook that was just mentioned before. So in a few cases there were some available collections, and then in other cases we have invited people from all over the world to actually contribute by filling in a Google form, which is available online. I'm just pointing you to this because this is actually a call for collaboration that we're issuing here as well. The Google form is in Spanish, French, and English, and we translated that so that we could actually have inputs from many different places. It worked as a form of collaboration, not just to enrich the resources bank, but also to strengthen some of the networks for collaboration that Karen was mentioning before, and I might come back to some of this afterwards. So as far as the collection of good practices, we think this is an ongoing project. Many of the things that were mentioned before, including, and I was just talking to Victoria first, that some of the good practices identified by the national regulators, they would certainly be very interesting to be placed in here. But also, I guess many of you, you're working for organizations that do have initiative that you may want to share. And of course, you can just go on the Google form, fill that in, and these will appear. So what we're doing now, we're going for another call for collaboration that will extend until the end of April. And then, of course, we need to collect all this, revise, and publish before the project is over. So there's like 2 months for this. The other action, which is important, and Karen will speak to this, is the set of learning resources. Here is just to show you what the page looks like. It's a set of learning resources, as we said, with 9 key themes from gender representation and the news to advocacy, which is done. And in the middle, as I said, you have journalism cultures, issues of leadership, abusive aspects of this. And the learning resources, they can be used, as Karen was saying, by educators in university settings or by trainers in professional settings. They're actually all available, accessible just for interested citizens and interested people. I think to access them, sorry, we need to go to, yes, but I'm just going through you need to be signed in. So you're expected to sign in, but this is like a very easy process. And once you are signed in, then you can access.
It doesn't cost you anything to sign in. It's completely free. Completely free.
Okay. And in this case, you have the whole series. So apart from the introduction, each unit is a thematic unit, and it's organized whereby you have a set of video lectures on different aspects of that specific topic, like in this case, issue and gender and representation.
Then you have some reading material, mostly relevant for us working in academia and university, but then you also have some other relevant resources, links to external resources, and of course you have the links to all interviews that have been conducted with experts and professionals on the specific topic. On the units, you may want to say something else?
I mean, maybe just, probably if we just look at the first unit, and the introduction to the first unit, just so you can see what it kind of looks like.
Maybe this is
Yeah.
more complete.
Yeah. So ignore the stuff on the because we have to sign in as well.
This is as administrator. You have a different visualization, but this is basically what you have.
Yes, this looks a bit messy, but when you actually go, when any of you go in there, it will look a little bit more streamlined, but it looks a bit messy at the moment.
So you have different segments for each topic. So each topic is actually split in different aspects, so that you have video lectures that are not too long. Apart from my case, I take responsibility. I talk about policy. Policy kind of drives me into using more time. Then you have video lectures, which are sitting on YouTube, so you can both access from the website or from the YouTube AGEMI project channel. And then you have the GEM talks are all these interviews that have been made. So that may be, you know, if you're running a training, you could use the interview as an icebreaker and then have a discussion, a conversation, any other kind of activity in that sense. Or if you are, as Karen was saying, just interested in a topic because you need to write an article, maybe you want to hear what other people have said about this.
And it is important to highlight, I think, that all the units will be subtitled in different languages.
And we can show you that on unit.
So to make...
So shall I enter?
Yeah.
Just to show?
Yeah.
The first video?
Yeah. Or if you click on the actual page link. And then scroll down, and it's the second thing.
Yeah, it's still charging.
Oh. Yeah, it's this one. Yeah, that's the one that works. And you can see whether it's subtitled in French, which you should be able to.
If audio is okay.
Hello, I'm Karen Ross, and I'll be your guide through this unit on gender representation in the news. I'll start by providing a brief overview of the topic. Claudia, if you just stop it and put the other subtitles on.
From here?
Yeah.
Yeah, we apologize, but the connection here, we're working with the phone as a hub.
Yeah.
So, of course, it can't be as it's supposed to be.
But in the subtitle option, you will have the opportunity to choose different languages. Yeah.
So in the end, every video lecture, every interview will be subtitled in the 3 languages.
The ways in which women and men have been represented in the news
Sound is also not very nice.
Yeah, considerable research. The sound is terrible. Since at least the 1970s.
Because we got the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the things that we that's not. Can I just use yours? So one of the things that we absolutely did want to do from the very beginning is to make the materials accessible in at least 3 languages. Originally, it was going to be the 3 languages of the project, which was Italian, English, and Swedish. But we very quickly realised that that probably wasn't very sensible in terms of access. So we then decided that, okay, what would be more sensible would be English, French, and Spanish to have a wider reach. So we've been working with a subtitling company to subtitle all the video lectures. So all the lectures are, once they've all been completed, will be subtitled in those 3 languages. But what we didn't realise is, until the summer school, is how important it was even for the English language films to also be subtitled in English. And I just didn't think about that as someone who has English as their first language. But actually it does make a difference, and we hadn't really thought about that. So fortunately we do actually have the budget to do that. So that's actually, it is something that we have done. And we also are now thinking if we can use a bit of a different part of the budget to subtitle the films, the GEM talks, because a number of those are in languages other than English. But it would be really helpful if all the moving image material was actually subtitled and therefore more accessible. As Claudia said, the Google form is in English, French and Spanish, so that a number of the good practice examples are in those multiple languages. So again, we're trying to make it more accessible, beyond the English-speaking world.
Few final things about the platform, and then of course you're welcome to just explore and see how it works. The news is about events, so where AGEMI has been presented, discussed, and of course today's event is included in this list. We're working on a press kit, so in the end there will be not only, well, you have a press release for today's event, but actually like a short presentation for the project and a how-to guide on how to navigate and use this platform, and then a few extras that have come about as ideas as we were talking and working on this. So the GEM talks are these interviews. This is another way you can access the interviews with experts and professionals. The GEM glossary is a way of explaining how the project is using specific terms. So how do we understand gender equality, gender mainstreaming, patriarchy, and sexism in order to be more transparent about the choices that have been made. Change session is actually a section where we would like to host all sorts of good examples of gender equal and gender inclusive journalism. So we're not actually collecting examples that have been produced by others, but if you have written a very good story, if you are running, I mean, the good practices are more initiatives, but in this case, we're talking about good examples of gender fair journalism. So we would very much like to include links to existing examples from different places. And then finally, the GEM map. Now, the map includes as a working process, both the good practices and a number of organizations. Visualization, for now, it's not very satisfying, but it will come. It comes up at some point. Basically, we have 180, more or less, between organizations and good practices. So the good practices that sit in the database, they appear in orange on the map, whereas the organization appear in purple. And of course, we see that there is a lot more across Europe, and you don't really get the sense of 180, but this is because we're working on how to link the database with the visuals. So this will be improved, but the idea is also that we can visualize not only where the good practices are, but where we have not yet collected existing good practices that we would like to show. And so certainly it's not a void space, but it's a space that we would like to be able to fill in. So as for the platform, I think that's where we are.
So, as Claudia said, we've got a YouTube channel because it was actually more sensible to host all the video materials on YouTube than actually on our own platform. It just made more sense. It also means that although we've actually got specific subtitling for English, French and Spanish, it means because it's on YouTube, any other language, there are 190 languages on YouTube, which you could all decide to actually include in terms of just clicking on that. So we just thought it would be more accessible to actually have those materials on YouTube. However, if you go on to the AGEMI YouTube channel, it is completely chaotic. So I wouldn't be advising you, I mean, you can go on there to have a look at things, but it doesn't actually work as a structure at the moment because we haven't quite spent enough time on playlists. We don't actually know how to do that yet. We're developing our YouTube skills.
We're working with experts that have been helping, supporting us in creating this. So don't trust her too much. You can go, you find lots of interesting things.
Yes, but we are doing things ourselves.
With the summer school.
We have road tested with the summer school. And so this is why Ord is here to tell us something about her experiences. So this is Ord Stanner. She's going to talk to us about being at the summer school and also doing something around the internships. So over to you, Ord. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
I have a bachelor in communication, but I'm now doing a master's degree in gender studies in France. But I spent an Erasmus semester in Padova, Italy, where I met Claudia Padovani, who kindly invited me and two other French colleagues to be a part of the AGEMI program, including a summer school in Sweden and a one-week internship in an organization. So yeah, we went to Sweden last summer with 30 other students from France, Italy, UK, and Sweden. And it was really amazing to meet them, to be able to share our thoughts on gender equality and media, and to discuss about our own country's practices. We also had the chance to meet a lot of media professionals who share with us their experiences and their good practices. One of the best part was also that we were able to learn practical skills on mobile journalism. In groups of three, we had to make a short video on a topic of our choice. And with my team, we decided to focus on the presence of women in Swedish media. I think we can see it.
Can we access from here? We tried?
Yeah, maybe. I think there is the link. And you have to ask.
Slowly.
Sweden is known for being a leader in gender equality. However, we found that web
Esci
media
dalla
in Sweden
presentazione.
does not always reflect this. Statistics from a prognosis Shameball created by Max Berggren show that only 35% of people mentioned on the Swedish television website are women. We met with Maria Brandstrom, a journalist from Swedish television, to discuss this gender gap.
At least in our news team, it has become better, and now we are 50% women and 50% men among the people that we interview. So for us, it's getting better, and I think it can if you work and if you think about these questions like all the time in your news work.
We asked the people of Gothenburg what they think about the representation of women in the Swedish media.
Women is not represented in newspaper. I see that's a big problem because Sweden is used to be equal.
One thing also in media that I've noticed is that every time when a woman does something like a crime or whatever, you always say a woman. Yeah, but when a man like murders someone, it's just like a person.
The men is more represented, and that's also the feeling. Like if the women speak more, they feel like the women is speaking everything.
People just kind of defer to men before they think of women. We say like mankind, it's in the word kind of.
We asked Maria Brandstrom what are the next steps for Swedish television in terms of progressing gender equality.
I think we have to start by analyzing it. Right now and in the future, we have to focus on the web page and see what kind of news are we having there, what pictures are we publishing, and do our news agenda start to act, because I don't think it should be that big a difference.
That's
so
it.
That was just a kind of really impossible thing for you to look at. But maybe you can just say something about the actual process of making that mojo with members of the public, how that felt for you as a kind of group of 3 students rocking up in the middle of Gothenburg, accosting people and saying, can you tell us what you think about gender equality?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we had classes on mobile journalism, which helped a lot because I never learned about mobile journalism and.
No, it's clever.
Okay.
There is the video. There's mixed things going on at the same time. And it's not my machine, so.
Yes. Hurrah.
Yeah, well, it was really nice to work in a group of 3, one from Sweden, one from England, and me, one from France. And what was really interesting about this subject is that, like in France and I think other European countries, we always
tend to think that, you know, Sweden and Scandinavian countries are like the best example of gender equality and all, but we thought that even in Sweden there is still a long way to go for gender equality. So.
And then we're going to move on to internships.
Yeah, last week I had the chance to do my internship at the International Federation of Journalists with Pamela, and it was really a great opportunity because I was able to help them with their 8th of March campaign. So, for example, I conducted several interviews for the testimonials, and I think it's really important for students and future professionals to have professional experiences to see what can be done to advance gender equality and also how they can be a part of it. So yeah, it was really a great opportunity for me.
So this is So these are just a list of the intern hosts, and the internship, kind of getting the internships organised, were very much Pamela and Eleanor. They're using their contacts. Some of us used our contacts to actually ask these organisations if they'd be willing to host an intern, and these are the organisations that said yes. And some of them, including IFJ, have actually offered more than one internship. And Capaeum was also going to, but that didn't quite work, not for reasons to do with Italy. But I mean, what's brilliant, I think, is the number of media organisations that actually welcome this as an opportunity to actually work with an intern. And I think that the responses that we've had from the interns, I think that Ord would say this as well, have been really positive. So I think as a methodology of actually incorporating, as it were, traditional lecturing processes, as well as actually having that opportunity to work with the media organisation, I think that's really worked for us as part of the project, a really important part of the project. Because part of what we were thinking of when we were developing it was that it would be quite useful for the project, but it's actually been really useful for the students. You know, it's not just, you weren't just you were actually guinea pigs, but hopefully you were guinea pigs which actually, you know, learnt something really, really useful and meaningful. So that's great for us in terms of how we write it up and how other people might think about a similar kind of project in a different country. This is what Claudia has been.
So, and last aspect that we would like to highlight is all the kind of collaboration that we managed to set up that were not really planned from the beginning. So as I said, we were all part of different networks. But as we started creating this project and we realized the good practices, but yes, and also the learning resources, it happened that at the same time a UNESCO promoted UniTwin network for gender media and ICT started to operate. And they are actually working to develop curricula for gender-aware media literacy that was also mentioned widely today. And so we realized that what we were doing could actually be part of the resources that this network could promote. And because it is UNESCO, it operates globally through their regional offices. So there is an ongoing collaboration with them. The other type of collaboration that we unexpectedly were able to set up is with another EU-funded project, which is a project to expand the Erasmus program, so mobility for students, and not only for students, because it's also about employing opportunities and internship. But in this case, it's what they call virtual exchange. So type of exchange and intercultural encounters through the use of technology, which is a concept of using technology for learning that goes well beyond what they call MOOC, so these massive online courses, which are like very unidirectional. In this case, what is created is a space like a classroom for people coming from different contexts, different countries, to debate the same issue. And so they've been using some of the AGEMI material, and we're working to have more of this and actually a consolidated collaboration with them over the next year or so, because this project is also ongoing, and that provides kind of a sense of how we can make the resources that have been created by this project sustainable and actually expand the network. So beyond our own institution and beyond the professional institutions that we've been working with, the Gender Media in ICT is the cover of a booklet that has been produced by the Unitwin UNESCO network that I mentioned. And it's coming up, so that will also be publicly available. And then the last mention of collaboration that we're actually discussing is with Gender Links, which is a very relevant advocacy and policy-oriented organization from Southern Africa, because over the years they've been doing a number of things that may be relevant not only to the AGEMI project, but to enrich, for instance, the collection of interviews and the collection of resources that we have created, and that is certainly in view of making what we've done more global and meaningful. So next steps, quickly, shall I go on? So very quickly, because it's late. We didn't say much about the app, which is also an output of the project. It will be available for Android and iPhone, and the concept of the app is ACT, as assess, challenge, and transform. So one of the functions of the app is that it can be used to do kind of simple monitoring of a piece of news. And so we're providing, it's kind of a monitoring tool whereby there are a few questions as what is the degree of gender fair inclusive language used in this article, and then there is also a little description of what is meant by gender inclusive, so that anybody who is either writing a piece or reading a piece, we can use this with students, could be used by NGOs who are working on gender fair media. They may also use that, and then in the end you have kind of a ranking on the basis of these resources. The second function is the challenge. So either you see something in this piece of news which is relevant to you and it's well done, or you see something you really don't like and you want to point that to the publisher and the editors. And so we provide guidelines on how to write to the editor to let them know that you like or do not like what you see. And then the transform is actually a call for collaborative action. So how can we learn from the transformative actions that other people have contributed? So these should be available in the next couple of weeks. And of course, on the platform, you will have a piece of news, but it will also be available as the AGEMI app on different stores. A few things that we are expected to do, because that's part of the project, is to produce an how-to guide, how to use this kind of resources, an evaluation plan, which is also going to be about how can we make this sustainable. And of course, any sort of collaboration, both those that we have created already, but future collaboration could be very meaningful. So depending on who is, as an institution, as European institution, as other universities or professional organization and unions, if you see anything interesting in this, we're certainly happy to discuss how we could maybe join forces and organize something. We'll be working to enrich and fill in the resources bank. So of course the Google form is there. And we are to strengthen this collaboration, of course, transnationally, but also at the national level. So I can give an example of how we are planning on using some of this in a discussion at the national level in Italy, where of course there's a lot of need for this. And so collaborating with Elena from Rome, with other organizations like Osservatorio di Pavia, and with the professional journalists and their association, we're organizing in June an event in Milano, where this will be presented, and it will be, of course, open to the discussion with a number of other professionals and journalists.
Keep talking, Claudia.
So we've said this already. You can help, and we would like very much you to do so, to do with your organization, with your individual expertise. So the Google form is there, and you can easily access from the platform. If you go to the space, that's the resource bank. If your organization is involved in these kind of activities, and of course we may not have met you before, so very nice if you can contact us to the AGEMI email address or any of our addresses and just point us to your organization. We'd be happy to create that and include that in the map. Any other organization that you know that you think should be in there. And then, of course, if you are an educator or you want to organize something like training for your own organization, all the learning resources are openly available and accessible. But we're also happy to maybe discuss if anything targeted, if anything can be adjusted to specific needs or point you to other existing resources. And most of all, in this very
few minutes that we may have in question and answer, if you do see any potential for collaboration, or if you have questions, of course, or if you want to make suggestions on how to move from AGEMI as a project to AGEMI as a community, we would very much welcome that. As we said, maybe one point that we can mention is most of what we heard in terms of the projects that have provided knowledge and information on what are the situation of gender unequal media across Europe, those were at the basis of what we started to think when we were designing this project. And so it's meant to be about education, it's meant to be about transforming cultural attitudes. It's meant to support those kind of initiatives that address and tackle the specific causes which may not be as visible, like when you have indicators and then you count how many women, how many men, but the causes that we have understood are like underlying persisting inequalities. So changing the organizational culture, making people who are in decision-making position more aware of what they could do. Why is it so important to have codes of conduct, and how that is not enough, because you also need to have some kind of support tools, monitoring. So all of that is somehow embedded in the AGEMI, and we think that this is also important in view of what's coming up next year. So next year is 2020, that will be 25 years after Beijing, and as we know, every time there is a Beijing Plus celebration, all these issues are back again on the agenda. So we're hoping that some of what is in the AGEMI and some of the outcomes that may derive from expanding the AGEMI community may also inform not only the public but the policy debate in looking at the Beijing Plus 25 agenda. So, merci.
Okay. We're running a little bit late, but I suggest that we hear from our last two speakers and then take questions, because then there's going to be drinks and snacks at the end, and that's your reward for sticking with us for the whole afternoon.
Hi everyone. We're just moving to the last session, and I know it's been a long day. Apologies for that. We had so much to tell about this project, but we wanted to end this day of discussion, or this afternoon of discussion, by talking about Belgium and talking about what's happening in Belgium. And I don't know if you had a look at the map earlier on, where you had the different points, different spots all around the world, and you saw a huge spot. Did you notice the huge spot for Belgium? It's because many people here, many organizations here have contributed to the resources bank and have proposed some new resources. And also, we had here lots of organizations that have hosted interns. So to close this session, I have two representatives of these fabulous organizations that have been helping us. One of them is Safia Kessas. She's a journalist. She's the head of diversity of RTBF, and RTBF has been one of the hosts, she has been hosted, one of the AGEMI intern, and our other speaker is Martine Simoni. She's a long-time women defender here in Belgium and women in the news, and she's done a lot for gender equality in the media. I think both of these speakers have been actually very heavily involved in this field. And Martine is the head of the Association des journalistes professionnels. So we're going to start with Safia. Safia will explain a little bit all the work that is being done at the RTBF. For those of you who know what the RTBF is, it's the Belgian Public Service television and radio, and it has done quite a bit recently to improve gender equality in the media, in their structures, in their content. Safia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm going to speak in English, so I'm going to apologize because it's not very easy for me. So, and I'm a woman, so I have to apologize. So ever since we started 3 years ago, RTBF takes a series of action to make its contents more inclusive, and so we continue to focus on equality and better representation of female, especially in the role of expert. So RTBF has set a strategy which declined itself mainly in 3 times: monitoring, trainings, and assistance and partnerships with civil society. So let's begin with the monitoring. Approaching topics such as gender equality or underrepresentation of women in our contents can raise a lot of emotional reactions in the newsrooms. So it becomes really necessary to work to objectify data in order to go beyond the basic discussions often used as a defensive mechanism by our peers and men colleagues. So journalism remains an environment dominated by men, as confirmed by the last report of the Association of Professional Journalists in Belgium, which states that sexism is still part of our newsroom. La Ligue du LOL, latest scandal, is another recent example of this terrible flag. So an important task that we're facing is our diversity equality monitoring. It allows us to see how much women are underrepresented as experts and how they are overrepresented, for instance, in entertainment programs. So only 37% of the people that take a part of the television information programs are women. These are the general figures, but if one takes a closer approach, 71% of spokespersons and 78% of the experts appearing on television are men. You know the data. So to sum it up, men are analysts, whereas women represent the vox populi. So considering studies done in other countries, we noticed that more frequent countings in terms of speaking time and women representation tended to ameliorate those numbers. So therefore, RTBF decided to switch from an annual to a quarterly monitoring. So we are the only media to do it in Belgium. So presentation of the monitoring to different level of the company joined with thought to give meaning to the numbers from top to teams. And for instance, we can show the monitoring and then show a video like that. So it's not translated, but I think you can understand.
Escape. Ça marche pas quand tu fais escape. C'est celle-ci. Oui, c'est celle-là.
A analysé près de 250 évaluations professionnelles dans plusieurs compagnies en technologie. Et ce qu'ils ont observé, c'est que 59% des hommes recevaient du feedback négatif contre 88% des femmes. Ce qu'on observe, c'est que contrairement aux hommes, les femmes se font critiquer sur leur personnalité et leur voix. Est-ce
So, uh, like in our newsroom, women are viewed as more emotional, but if they assert themselves, men consider them as an aggressive person. So the data need really to be efficient, to be accompanied with training. So the reason why women are underrepresented in our media is closely related to our perception of the world. So-called rational choices we make are in fact mentored by stereotypes, as you know it. So looking for speakers, asking questions before covering news will make content more qualitative and more fair to women. So we work as automatic pilots under stress. This is why we wanted to offer the possibility to our teams to gain more insight in terms of unconscious bias. And this training is especially aimed to at producers, newsroom, and sports, because we all have unconscious bias, even journalists. So, as I just mentioned before, sexism is a fact in the newsroom, but on top of that, women are being harassed online. So racialized journalists suffer from another form of violence. Racism and sexism are often closely related. So last year, one of our weather forecast anchor, Cecile Junga, was the victim of racist attacks online and off. This was, of course, revolting and called for reaction, but it was also a crucial test to see how we were responding to such non-acceptable reaction at RTBF. So it was also coming at the time that we were developing tools now to face racism and coach RTBF staff on the subject. So this year, there will be different sessions planned, articulated in two parts: coaching and experiences sharing. The goal are to strengthen the arguments against racism and sexism, but also to free speech on related experiences, sometimes internalized. Media also sometimes deal thematics such as gender equality in an inappropriate way. Violence against women is relegated in short articles and to back pages. So the reasons invoked by the authors to justify their violent behavior are mentioned as such in the analyzed articles, and the journalist does not stress that such reasons are not legitimate motives for hurting or killing a woman. So again, RTBF is the only Belgian-French media that publicly promised to adopt a recommendation of the Association of Professional Journalists about gender equality, as Martin Simonis will explain just after. So we are struggling again words such as passionate crime to describe what is a murder, a feminicide, treated as a society fact and not only as a short news. So it's very important for us. Fight against sexism also show women faces in a role of experts to show them under another light and be a role model for girls' careers. So in that aspect, we are continuing the partnership with again, the Association of Journalists and Expertalia, which is an experts database. So RTBF organized 3 coaching sessions a year. About 80 persons from diversity have been media coached, both on radio speaking skills and on television appearances. Experts were coming from NGOs, academical or economical world. And in addition of that, there's a creation of our journalist expert network. So 2 times a year at RTBF, this network will help to overcome the fear some journalists feel toward a risk-taking move that would represent the fact to have someone that you don't know talking about certain subject. So the goal of those meetings is to fight fears by dialogue and to make new mobile numbers, those of the women expert in journalist phones, and it works. So on the 8th of March, also, we will launch a new digital information project. The goals are to highlight women experts profile or work on subjects also that aren't headlines or even not taken into account in mainstream medias. So, and also to talk about invisible occupations. La deuxième petite vidéo.
Invisible.
marche pas. Ah, c'est bon. Non, c'est pas celle-là.
No, no, it's the other one.
So, yeah, it was funny because when they designed it at the first time, it was a man who designed it. It was they were all like blonde and thin. So, so we're to conclude, RTBF intends to pursue its actions by building a diversity equality plan in the coming years. And also, now we are really conscious that there is no natural process to make figures and representation change. Without protocols, there is no change in the future. So that's it, and it's the end. Thank you, and sorry, I had to read it because I don't feel comfortable in English, so sorry.
Thank you very much, Safia, and we're very much looking forward to watch this new program. And with such a name, it's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be really interesting. And we're moving on now to Martin. It's interesting because we're all native French speakers speaking English, as you can notice. Now it's Martin Simonis. I guess your presentation, c'est Women and the Media, right?
Yes. No, c'est pas ça. Ah, si, pardon.
Yes, it is, Pamela. Thank you. So be courageous and stay with us. This is the last time, the last speech for today. So my name is Martin Simonis. I'm General Secretary of the Belgian Union of Journalists. You can go to the next slide, please. So Belgian Union of Journalists has two entities. One is Flemish Dutch, as the VVJ, and I will speak about what we do in French and German speaking part of the union, which is AGP. And AGP represents 2,500 professional journalists in Belgium. We provide a lot of services to our members: official press card, professional and legal advice, legal assistance, trade union work, of course, but also for freelancers, training, financial support for quality journalism, media literacy, ethics, lobby on press freedom, and so on and so on. So everything which can be interesting for our members who are professional journalists. And since 2010, we work on equality and diversity, so almost 10 years now. Yes, thank you. We have provided a lot of research and study on media content. I will go very quick on it because you know the reality. It was not only about men and women, but broader about diversity. The first study was the global media monitoring in 2010, and in 2011 we decided to analyze the content of the daily press, because there are a lot of studies on the broadcast, on television, but there were nothing on written press. So we decided to work on it under the scope of diversity. So not only men and women, but also ethnical and social origin, age, profession, and so on. We participate in a global media monitoring project once again in 2015. And we had a new barometer in 2014. This means for content study to analyze how media cover this question. And we are now preparing a new barometer. It will be published in a few weeks or months. I laugh because one of the authors of the barometer is there, and it's Sabri. So maybe he can tell you it's a huge work. But well, it's coming. And last year, yes, you can go to the next. Thank you. Last year we have organized and published a 5th study on content, how media covers the violence against women. And this was not made with a university. I'm sorry. This was made with a university and, which is interesting, a lot of women or feminist associations. And this was a very interesting work, and certainly with this feminist association, because it has given us the possibility to publish some recommendation for journalists when they have to speak about violence against women. If you are interested in, it's very late, so I don't go deep in the recommendation we wrote for the journalists. There are some flyers there on the table, and you can read it. And last 2 studies we have done, yes. But this time it's no more on the coverage of media, it's on the profession of journalism. In 2013 we had a university study on diversity in the profession. How is the profession of journalism diverse or not? Not at all. And of course it was made with a university, and in 2018, I mean last year, we had a new study on women in the profession. So, and this is a very big and rich study. There are so many interesting to read on it. A few conclusions of these 7 studies and what we have done after that, because you can go on having studies if nothing happens. Well, change of job. First, the studies on media coverage. When you open a newspaper in Belgium, you see less than 20% women in it. So it's very bad. Of course, the underrepresentation of women is unacceptable. Women are especially invisible in sport, politics, economics, finance, what we call the hard news. Women mostly occupy supporting roles, and nearly 9 experts out of 10 interviewed are men. Women are nonetheless equally represented until the age of 20, then they disappear from the news. Women are less identified than men, and so on and so on. You can read all of this disparate conclusion in our studies. Our answer of all of these conclusion was, of course, you can go on having studies, but maybe we should do something else. And we decided to give journalists a tool. The idea was to provide a pragmatic answer to the usual saying, there are no experts women. So, of course, there are. And now you are a journalist and you can find them because they are there. And this is called Expertalia. It's a database which identified and present expert women, but also expert men if they are from diverse origins, because the problem is the same for them. They are invisible. Expertalia wants to respond to the deficits and shortcomings observed in women's presence and people from a variety of backgrounds. The chosen axis is expertise. The idea is to offer journalists a tool to facilitate the diversification of sources that favors equality and diversity. For the moment, we have 400 experts in Expertalia. It was launched 2 years ago. So, I mean, we slowly, but we are growing. And 300 Belgian journalists are using Expertalia. Of course, it's not enough. The idea was that all our members should use this, but that's not the case. So the experts are from 3 groups: academic, professional, and associative. And when you are logged on Expertalia, you have access to the personal information of the expert, the CV, the photos, the videos, the publication. For example, if you have a research on the keyword gender, you will find, yes, you will find Pamela, for instance. And a lot of other ones. This was only the first page, but you can also have, I don't know, a research on physical, or it's not only about gender, it's about all the expertise you want to find in a society. With Expertalia, we have, and as Safia told you, we have a partnership with the public broadcast RTBF to provide to the expert media coaching. The idea is to help women to take the floor on television or on the radio. And the idea is also, after this media coaching, to have to make a videos presentation of the expert. And the video is available on Expertalia. That means when a journalist is looking for an expert, he can see how she is, how she looks, how she speaks, and say, okay, it's all right, because usually it's all right. And you also can find the video on the YouTube channel. I'm very happy with this partnership, because it helps to visibilize the experts. And they, for the first time, they come into television and they sit down with a micro, and they try to express themselves. And at the end of the day, well, it's finished. It's all right. They know it. They can do it. They don't dare. They dare, and then they. Okay, I think it's very helpful, and it's a very good partnership between RTBF and AGP. So, at the end, why do we do this? For us, as Union of Journalists, it's a question of quality of journalism. Because if more than the half of population, I mean the women, are bad or not represented in the news, what is the value of this news? So the idea is to help with to help journalists to improve the quality. And as it is an initiative of their own professional union, we have a kind of legitimacy to do this. It's easier for journalists to hear something from their union than hearing it from NGO or from politics. So the legitimacy is very important. And it's also built upon recent media analysis based on indisputable methodology. There is rationality. It's not only I think, or it's not only intuition. These are figures. We also try to avoid the value judgment, aiming for quality, diversified sources, angles. That's professionalism. If you speak to a journalist about professionalism, he will listen to. And the aim is to make media and journalists allies in the fight for equality and parity. Now, we also had 2 other studies now on the professional. I will say a few words on them. About women in the newsroom, women in the profession. In Belgium, and it's not like that in all European countries, but in Belgium we only have 35% of women in the profession. We see at all the age that women journalists are more educated than men. They of course, are underrepresented in the middle management, and there is also, and we can put now figures on this, an important salary gap. The average income of men is 16% higher than average income of women in the profession. The career of the women journalist is shorter than the career of the men journalist, and respondents are less likely to have children. 63% of women journalists, again 80% of men. Women face a lot of obstacles in their career. Of course, men face obstacles too, but there are some difference, and that was the idea of this study, is to see if some obstacles were different for women and if they were gender related. We have a big difficulty for women is to lead a parental life and work as a journalist. Journalism is a time-consuming job and involves more radical life choices between private and professional for women. The rigid working conditions prevent a balanced private-professional lifestyle. Sexism in the newsroom is significant and pregnant, much more than we thought. This study shows it, and at a very well, for us it was not a surprise, but on that point it was. And then moral and sexual harassment in the media, it's much more against women than men. And just maybe a few examples from the survey. You can go to the next. When we ask men and women journalists, have you ever been victim of harassment, moral or sexual, and or aggression inside the newsroom? For sexual harassment, women say yes at 11%. The men, they don't say yes, they say no. And for moral harassment, women say yes at 41%. And men 25%. Even 25%, it's a lot, but 41%, it's. And then the next question was very interesting. Have you ever witnessed harassment, moral or sexual, and or aggression inside the newsroom? Witness of sexual harassment, women say yes at 14%, and men at 7%. And moral harassment, women say yes, I've witnessed it at 42%, men at 30%. This is interesting because they are in the same newsroom, but they don't seem to see the same things. And that's something very interesting for what we are doing with this. One thing the study shows is the reason why women journalists leave the profession, because we know that they leave the profession near the age of 35. And we try to understand why. We had a lot of reasons. These are the main reasons. Job insecurity, that's the first reason. Mental load, lack of valorization, absence of managerial policies, generalized denial and cynicism from management, sexism, paternalism, harassment, and this all has as consequences that women go in themselves, they use the silence, they get illness, abnormal stress, professional and moral burnout. So it's not so funny being a women journalist in Belgium. Did you see this? No, what can we do with all of this? Maybe going back home and cry or do something. The idea is to do something with this. And we are going to organize a campaign in the next 2 years for women journalists. And the campaign will be based on the request of the women journalists, also the men journalists, because we are going to work on both groups. The idea is first to organize women in the newsroom, to provide them with training in negotiation, fighting sexism, to organize solidarity and mentoring for young journalists, because that's something they ask, and something that the older journalists say. When I began to work, I did not find any solidarity. It was difficult to have contact in the profession, and we also have a special target is the students. And each time the School of Journalists invite us to speak on these topics, of course we go and speak on it, and certainly to young women journalists or student journalists. But it's not enough working on the group of professionals. We also have to work to target the employers. The idea is to stop the denial of sexism, which is very pregnant. There is no sexism in this profession. What are you talking about? So, and even if they are honest, they say, yes, but it's not so. It's not such a big problem, but it is. The idea is that equality also become a value for media companies. The idea is to get transparency of wage, which will be difficult, and then to organize with some employer policy on reconciliation of work and family life, because that's a very big problem for women journalists, but for men journalists too. So I think there is still a long way to get equality on the media sector, but I have hope because, well, I'm General Secretary since more than 25 years, but I know we will get equality before I get retired, because 20 years ago that was a non-subject. Now it's on the agenda. And 20 years ago, when I was speaking about sexism in the relation in the newsroom, everybody was laughing on it. Now it's a real subject, and we have studies that show that there is sexism and still inequality. And a lot of initiative, as you have seen, on these topics. And I think AGEMI comes at the right moment. Thank you for this initiative. I think it's very interesting seeing all of these things happening in all the country. I would also add at the end that all the work we have done in Belgium on this topic, equality, diversity, was possible because we got financial support from a direction of equal opportunities. Otherwise, it would not have been possible for a union of journalists to do such a great, I say great because, well, to do such a job. But that's why, as we got some financial support, and it will go on for the next 3 years, we could do this. So I hope equality, it's not for tomorrow, but it will coming. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to say that this study is one of the first studies that exists in Europe that is so detailed and that provides so much information on the situation of women journalists. And I really hope that it will also serve as a basis for that other countries will follow. And I would also encourage all of you to, if you're based in Belgium, to register on Expertalia, because I'm sure you have an expertise to share. And if you're not in Belgium, there are similar initiatives happening in many countries, because many media have understood the importance to have this such expert data. So I would strongly encourage you to be part of it, because, and actually it works, and they call me sometimes, but not on gender, but they call me, and I think it works, and I think if we want to make a change, we have to take our own responsibility, and I think our responsibility is to be on this kind of expert data and provide our expertise. I don't know if you want to say a final word. Maybe we could take a couple of questions, like, yes.
Thank you so much for delivering such an interesting presentation. I'm here, student at ULB, and my question is about: is it possible? What problems did I face when I wrote stories on things like this? Is using gender as a storyteller, because when you write from your perspective or you deliver a talk, I'm now trying to avoid saying she, me. In different languages, let's say in German, for example, and in French, we have il or ich. Yes, right, and also in other languages, whereas in English we don't have this, it's just pure thing. And now in Germany, in some PR or some materials, they use slash, like Journalistinnen, zum Beispiel, or also in different, I saw this mostly in German, actually, information sources, when they have slash and they add Renin. And I'm wondering if this is the way that might actually promote or support the idea of gender equality, or this captures attention and is not the way, because I haven't seen this in French press, for example. And for me personally, as I'm from Russia, and we have also we have changes in the end, I'm now trying to avoid the ending and using passive forms, for example, or neutral, and not to attract attention, just to focus on the subject. And now I'm confused if this is the right path and we really want to avoid, or is it vice versa? We want to, let's say, postulate that, well, we are talking about subject, right? But it's equality, and that's okay to say, like, really in the very end. So would you please comment on this? And also in broadcasting, right? Will the ending in the end change the perception of the subject, making this more serious, or less serious? Yeah, this is the question. Thank you.
So you.
Are you okay? Je peux répondre un peu. Je serais plus à l'aise en français. Oui. You speak French?
Je parle un peu.
Tout le monde parle français dans la salle? Ouais, super. Alors, je vais pouvoir y aller. Bon, on peut terminer comme ça, mais en fait, tout dépend l'agenda. Bah, en fait, si en fait tu parles d'écriture inclusive, tout simplement. Moi, je suis venue avec cette proposition parmi d'autres dans le cadre du plan égalité qu'on va lancer dans mon entreprise. Et bon, on m'a dit non. Mais de l'autre côté, quand j'écris dans mon entreprise des mails, je les écris en écriture inclusive, comme beaucoup d'autres collègues. Et donc, je pense que progressivement, on va y arriver. Et je pense que ça n'enlève rien à la dimension analytique ou sérieuse du sujet. Au contraire, ça permet d'ouvrir les imaginaires. Et donc, mais je pense que c'est trop tôt en Belgique. Enfin, en tout cas, dans mon média, je pense que c'est trop tôt. Quand on voit tous les problèmes qu'on rencontre dans les rédactions, il faut essayer d'avancer petit à petit. Mais moi, je considère que c'est un élément qualitatif que j'ajoute dans mes chroniques, dans mes billets. J'essaye d'écrire de façon neutre, pas vraiment de façon inclusive pour pas choquer, mais en tout cas de façon neutre. Je pense que ça a un impact. Mais je dirais que pour moi, ce qui est le plus important encore aujourd'hui dans les priorités, mais bon, voilà, qui suis-je pour dire où sont les priorités, c'est d'avoir une grille genre sur tous les sujets d'information. Ça, pour moi, c'est le plus important. Et ça rendrait les sujets, en tout cas de mes collègues masculins qui n'y pensent pas, plus sérieux. Tu as compris? Plus ou moins? Ou bien... So,
I think what Safia wants to say is the language is one thing, but and it's important. The other thing is to have a gender approach on each subject. For instance, you make a subject as journalist on pensions, retirement pension. If you don't take a gender approach, you miss something, because it's so different for men and women. J'ai pris ton exemple des pensions. It's very different for men and women, and usually we hear, well, the age of retirement is, and they forget that for the women the career was so different, and it was stopped by children, blah blah blah. You know, so if you don't have this gender approach when you take a subject and you have to speak about a subject as journalist, you miss half of the population. And that's maybe more important. Well, I don't know, it's not a priority, but certainly as much important than having an inclusive language. And for some languages it's much more, for me everything is important. You have to do everything if you have time, it's all right. But with some languages it's much more easier than with others. French, it's not easy to be inclusive. I mean, someone who writes a book is an auteur, and so if it's a woman, a lot of them said auteure with a e at the end, and but now there is a newspaper in Belgium who decided to say autrice. Because auteure, you don't hear that it is a woman. Autrice, you hear it. Well, we have acteur, an actor, actrice exists in French from years and years, so why not autrice? But I mean, this language, French, it's not easy to be inclusive. I think other languages are easier than French. And in France, you have the AGEMI, which is a kind of group of old white men saying that you will not change anything at my language. This is my language. Don't touch it.
Merci Martine. Je crois qu'on n'a plus beaucoup de temps, donc on va devoir. We have to stop because we wanted to. Yeah, maybe one last question, but then we need to close because we wanted to have a drink and we can continue this conversation around drinks. Does anyone have a last question to ask? No? Okay. So I would like to thank you very much. Would you, Karen, would you like to say something? I would like to thank very much the speakers and to open the debate also to something that is very concrete and that I think can really make a difference how we talk about women and men in the news. Karen?
So let's just thank our two speakers. I mean, I just wanted to just say thank you for just sticking around until now. We know that it's gone over a little bit, but as I said, the reward is snacks and drinks at the end. I mean, I would really encourage you to go on the platform, have a... Oh, God, I've been blinded. Have a look at the platform, see what's on there, and keep checking back, because over the next couple of months, certainly until the end of the project, we will be adding more things, adding more learning resources, adding more good practices. And we're hoping that you, the community, will also be adding things, so emailing us saying, oh, I really like this, or this link broke, or giving us some feedback, because we're in that process. We're in the process of development. And the more that we get your thoughts as people in the community who are going to, you are our target. We want you to be using those resources. So anything that you see that you think, oh, I heard this really good practice about something, just email us. You know, just tell us about those things. As I said, because everyone, I think pretty much everyone in the room has got to hear through the Eventbrite site, we'll use that as a list to sort of send you stuff, because we now have you. We know where you live. Well, we don't know where you live, but we know who you are. Can I also urge you, please, to just spend 5 minutes with your drink filling in the questionnaire? That would just be really helpful. I hope that you've enjoyed and learnt something from this afternoon. It's been great that, you know, to have your questions, to have your attendance, and thank you and goodbye. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to my colleagues as well.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering, because of all these very interesting things you're doing, so in Italy, for instance, we also have a database of experts that was recently created on the, like looking at other models from...
You also have this with the
We also have this, yes.
recommendation for journalists.
The Manifesto di Venezia, that's 2017. So many of these things we're collecting in this database of good practices, and of course it may be a bit demanding to fill in, but I was wondering if we can find a way that either you point us to what you think are the good practices that you've been putting in place that are definitely worth sharing, and we can have somebody, either myself or students working with me, to actually create a profile. This we've done in the past. But since you're very familiar with this, if you could just maybe highlight it and send us the link of like 2-3 initiatives. Because I think the Expertalia, certainly, I mean, we are collecting good practices like this data bank of expertise.
This one is on the...
You know, I'm talking about the Expertalia. So Expertalia should be in there. Like we have the Cento Esperte from Italy. But like the code and recommendations that you mentioned also. So many of these things, because I feel, I mean, I'm familiar with Giulia, the Professional Journalist Association working in Italy, and they're promoting these activities. And of course they are concerned with Italian